What's the date? It is the March 9th. Today is March 9th, 2020. This is the afternoon work session of the Portland City Council. This is a budget work session, and today we are focusing on the Recreational Cannabis Tax Fund. Director Kennard, good afternoon.
That's right. Good afternoon, Mayor, Council, advisors, and colleagues. Jessica Kennard, City Budget Director. For today's session, we're dedicating the first 2 hours to discuss and deliberate upon allocation of resources that are generated by the city's recreational cannabis tax. I'm here to provide a brief overview of the tax, a history of allocations, high-level information on current investments, and Cannabis Fund forecast information for fiscal year 2021. There are a number of requests for new Cannabis Fund resources that bureaus submitted at the end of February per budget guidance. You have submission materials in your binders behind this presentation, so in the work session materials towards the back of your binder. I will walk through these proposals at a very high level, and bureaus are available to come to the table and give a brief overview of their, or a brief presentation rather, on their requests. We will attempt to close this conversation at 3 p.m. so we can have a short break, and then we will have presentations and a discussion around special appropriations. So now turning to the presentation.
Thank you. And Director Kennard, just so you know, I will have to take a break in 1 hour. There's a matter I have to attend to, but I'll catch up quickly, I promise.
Absolutely. Thank you. So, by way of background, Oregon voters legalized the possession and sale of recreational cannabis in 2014, also authorizing state retail tax on the sales of cannabis. The legislation allowed local jurisdictions to levy up to 3% in local tax on cannabis sales and then in 2016, Portland voters approved a ballot measure authorizing the city to collect the 3% local tax. The measure identified 3 categories for use of the collected tax. It's a lot of text on that slide, but I wanted to be sure that folks had the language specifically verbatim as it was written in the ballot measure, so it's there on the slide for you. I'll read it for the record. So the first purpose was drug and alcohol education and treatment programs, including but not limited to services that increase access to these programs and programs that support rehabilitation and employment readiness. Second is public safety investments to reduce impacts of drug and alcohol abuse, such as police DUI training and enforcement, support for firefighter paramedics, street infrastructure projects that improve safety, other initiatives to reduce the impacts of drug and alcohol abuse, and then finally, the third category is support for neighborhood small businesses, especially women-owned and minority-owned businesses, including but not limited to business incubator programs, management training, and job training opportunities, and providing economic opportunity and education to communities disproportionately impacted by cannabis prohibition. So, beginning last year, CBO took over the fiduciary responsibility of the fund. We treat our management of this fund similarly to how we treat our management of the general fund. That means that we're responsible for producing and sharing a balanced forecast for the resource collection, reviewing and reporting on the allocation of resources as well as programmatic outcomes as provided by program managing bureaus, and receiving requests for new cannabis tax resources for council consideration. Ultimately, the appropriation of these resources in support of the identified allowable uses is a policy decision for council. So I'll now walk you briefly through the historical allocations. Each of the following 3 slides shows a breakdown of allocations, one by bureau, which is sort of that rectangular tree map graph, and then by the 3 service areas, which is the donut chart on the right. We've also printed and I think handed out to you individually. Everybody should have sort of this colorful, large table that shows the allocation more specifically by the specific program by year. So this is another reference document. Are we all set?
Do you have another copy of the PowerPoint, please?
Oh, yes. Yeah, Christy, you got her? Yes, we will get that for you.
Love one of those too. If we have it. We didn't get one of those.
You didn't get a presentation?
Oh, it's in the binder? Oh, never mind. It's coming.
It was in mine. Oh, wait. It gets passed out to different places. So we're
So Danechka, if you want to go to the red tab, there's a red tab. Go there. Yeah, I'm sorry. pause to make sure everybody has their materials.
Yeah, I know.
The red
Okay,
tab
we're with you now.
signifies the beginning of work session materials, and then
It's different from last year's.
it is different,
In several
yes,
different places, which makes it different.
yes. So there's, behind that, there's a tab that says Cannabis Fund Work Session. It's behind, got it? Okay,
All right.
okay, great.
Oh, boom. Like
Thanks, you all.
magic.
Please stop me at any point. I know that there's a lot of material, so please do not be ashamed to interrupt me and say you don't know where I am right now, and we'll pause and make sure everybody's in the same spot. Okay, so right now we are on the slide that has it says the FY 2017-18 allocations totaled $3 million. Has a rectangular tree map on the left and a donut chart on the right. So, and as I mentioned, so we also, this might be a more helpful document. This is sort of to show you kind of the breakdown by bureau and the breakdown by the service levels. If you want a more specific bureau by bureau and allocation by allocation look, this one document that we just passed out has all of that information in it. So you can see in fiscal year 2017-18, in the first year when we allocated resources, total allocations were $3 million. And you can see there in the majority of those resources went to sort of the public safety category. Actually, the majority was to the Bureau of Transportation for Vision Zero type activities. Other allocations included money for DUI training and traffic enforcement in the Police Bureau at about $500,000. Money for the Police Bureau's Service Coordination Team, which was partial program cost, which was the category of drug and alcohol education and treatment for $410,000. And then there was an allocation of one-time funds for community grants and small business grants through Civic Life and Prosper in that year as well. Moving on to fiscal year 2018-19, you can see again the majority of the grants went to the public safety category. Again, a significant portion went to the Bureau of Transportation's Vision Zero efforts. And this year, a significant portion also went to traffic enforcement and DUI training through the Police Bureau. And then other allocations included, again, one-time allocations for community grants and small business development, or small business grants and business development support.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Can you tell me, do you know if those dollars went to those categories, or they're just the categories that were identified on the ballot initiative?
So the allocation are resources as they were requested and allocated to bureaus that designated, sort of in the same way that bureaus say, I want money to do the X, Y, and Z. Bureau said, I want cannabis fund resources to provide, these types of community grants. And so it went to sort of, we categorized it as such based upon what the Bureau told us they were going to put those resources towards. Does that answer your question?
I asked that question because I know a year ago when we asked a question about the DUI training, what we found was that there was no DUI training. And so I just want to know that last year's allocation really did go to that type of activity versus it just being a category that was identified in the ballot initiative itself.
Thank you for that question, Commissioner. So once we get through these allocation slides, we're going to talk about the way that these resources have been spent more specifically. And if you have specific questions, we can ask the Bureau to come up and speak to that.
But I think it's important to note in that fiscal year, you'll note that there was no money for the service coordination team, and there was more money for the other category, including traffic enforcement. And that was at the request of the business community. When we put up the business tax, they said they wanted some of their money to go to the service coordination team. And I think that's something that we need to reevaluate, because I was really happy in the first year that we did fund the service coordination team, and over the 12 years that I've been here, it's constantly been on the cut list, and so I would be very happy to have it back funded with cannabis tax money so that it's safer.
Well, I think that's a conversation we should have. I don't know that this is the appropriate fund to fund that, but I'm certainly happy to have that conversation.
Great. Okay, so those were the 2018-19 allocations, and then we move into the current year, which is the 2019-20 year, and you can see that $6.5 million was allocated. I will state that a portion of that was via carryover. And you see about 4.2 million, and I'm sorry, the donut chart, the text is a little bit dark, but it's about $4.2 million towards the public safety category. Again, funding Vision Zero efforts in the Bureau of Transportation and traffic enforcement efforts and potentially DUI training in the Police Bureau. Also, funding this past year for the first time went to the Housing Bureau for supportive housing services and mobile health supports, as well as records expungement work. And then again, one-time resources went to Civic Life for community grants. Funding went to the Prosper Portland for small business grants and business development, as well as neighborhood business support and Mercatus My People's Market. Oh, I'm going backwards. Turning this upside down. There we go. All right, so briefly, to give a highlight of the summary of resource use by Bureau. So again, this is a really high-level summary. We attempted to collect information from bureaus, but bureaus are really, as the program managers, can speak to a lot more of the specifics around programs. So if you have specific questions, I would probably defer to some bureau experts to come up. But within the Police Bureau, so currently in the Police Bureau, the budget includes an ongoing allocation of cannabis tax funding. The amount of the requested allocation in the coming fiscal year is approximately $2.3 million. This allocation supports regular straight-time salary and benefits for operations and investigations programs within the traffic division. So according to what the Bureau has provided to us, the program activities include DUI enforcement, speed enforcement, Vision Zero missions, distracted driving enforcement. And the location, method, and timing of proactive enforcement missions is dependent on a collaborative process with community partners, advocate agencies, victims of traffic violence, and other public service agencies, as well as the use of crash data. So it's important to note that this allocation does support a portion of overall program costs. So you can see in this table here that's provided on the right, the program receives a significant amount of general fund with $5.3 million, about $2.3 million of recreational cannabis fund tax, and then some other sources. And then the actual total program budget, which you don't see all the sources here, is about $8.5 million. So this just supports a portion of those program costs. I think perhaps, Commissioner, this gets to your more specific question around the way that those resources are allocated. Would you like for me to pause to bring the Bureau up, or should I keep going?
Keep going.
Okay, great. So at a high level, moving to the next slide, the Bureau of Transportation. Currently, the Vision Zero program in the Bureau of Transportation receives an ongoing allocation of cannabis funds, which would be equivalent to about $1.7 million in the upcoming fiscal 2021 budget. These resources support program activities for the Vision Zero action plan. The Bureau focuses investment in education and infrastructure improvements in the high crash networks, primarily in East Portland. The Bureau states that their success is tracked and measured based on the type of investment program, and given that it's only been 2 years since the initial investment, the crash data is inconclusive at this point in time in terms of measuring the impact of these investments. For this program, it's worth noting that Cannabis Fund resources do comprise the primary funding source. So then another bureau that has received resources from the Cannabis Fund is the Civic Life. The Office of Community and Civic Life has received one-time allocations for the past 2 years to support their cannabis social equity grants. These grants are intended to aid, strengthen, and serve restorative justice, community reinvestment, and wealth creation in communities that have been disproportionately impacted by cannabis prohibition laws. The table that you see on the right shows the allocations of the roughly $635,000 in grants that were awarded during last year's 18-19 grant cycle. These grants went to community organizations supporting efforts to clear and expunge criminal records and support workforce development. And the 1920 grant awards are currently being processed by Civic Life, so they have not yet been allocated, but they are in the process of reviewing those applications and anticipate awarding those soon. As the program has relied on one-time cannabis fund resources as well as program carryover, this program would require allocation of new resources in the next budget cycle in order to continue these grants. So these are one-time funds. They will be expiring unless council decides to allocate new resources in the next budget cycle. Prosper Portland currently receives both an ongoing allocation of cannabis fund resources and has historically received some one-time allocations as well. The chart you see on the right combines both the ongoing and one-time resources that were allocated in this year. So in the current year, these resources are supporting a handful of programs included in the Bureau's Inclusive Entrepreneurship Program, which is detailed in text here. So these investments target business support and wealth creation for people of color, women founders, and low-income business owners. And cannabis resources, you'll note here, currently support approximately 21% of the total program's budget. So this is another example of a program that is partially supported by cannabis fund resources. The Bureau states that if current ongoing allocation were to be reduced, because they are receiving an ongoing allocation currently, it is expected that there would be program impacts for agencies supporting these groups and this work.
Question on this slide. The Southeast Works number for both Prosper and Civic Life is the same. Is that the same grant, or do they each get $71,321?
That is a great question. So I'm looking on Prosper Portland. The Prosper Portland slide, you said 71,000?
So on both the Civic Life and the Prosper Portland table, the bottom item is Southeast Works, and both of them have an allocation of $71,321. And I'm just wondering, do they each give Southeast Works that amount?
That's a good question.
No.
Is it duplicate?
Sorry, Commissioner, no, they did not. That was actually a slide that I think had an error in it when I thought we grabbed them all.
So which bureau does give them the money to Southeast Works?
Civic Life.
Thank you. So does that mean that the number total for Prosper's incorrect? Oh, okay, got it. I understand math not working.
Okay. So looking ahead to 2021, this year we produced our first 5-year forecast of the Cannabis Fund. We're treating the management of this fund, as I mentioned earlier, similarly to our management of the general fund. Thus, we assume that bureaus with ongoing allocations may include the ongoing resources in their fiscal 2021 requested budgets with normal inflationary factors applied, and we assume that current one-time resources would automatically expire if council does not take action to renew those allocations. We released a balanced 5-year forecast for the fund in January of 2020. At a high level, the forecast anticipates revenues will continue growing, albeit at a slower pace than a year ago. And per financial policy and given industry dynamics and the relatively short history of this tax, the forecast represents a conservative revenue forecast. This 5-year forecast does assume a total of $6 million in resources, and accounting for the current ongoing allocations, assuming a contingency and ending balance of $500,000, this forecast yields $680,000 in available ongoing resources and $127,000 in available one-time resources. Budget guidance instructed bureaus to submit requests separately for these resources with a due date of February 27th. CBO collected these submissions, and they're included in your work session materials behind your slideshow presentation, with I think the exception of you, Commissioner Fritz, and they were hand-delivered, so I hope that you received those materials. So I'll now briefly provide the very high points of those requests, but bureaus are also here and able to speak to each of those requests more fully. So within the Office of Community and Civic Life, the first request, the request is for $1 million in ongoing resources to the Cannabis Social Equity Grant Program, which we discussed a few slides ago. These funds are anticipated to provide additional resources to meet the demand as measured through the number of grant applications received. So, for example, during the original grant process, the Bureau received grant applications totaling $3.8 million in requests for an available pool of resources of about 631. So they have increased the size of this to sort of match what they anticipate as the demand. CBO would just note that this request exceeds the amount of excess ongoing resources available in the forecast. So if council were to support support fully funding this request, it would require identifying a reduction to other current ongoing allocations. The Portland Police Bureau, second request, has submitted a request for $136,243 in ongoing resources to support one new officer in the Traffic Division. The position is expected to enable the expansion of the Bureau's efforts to promote traffic safety and support Vision Zero efforts. Specifically, this request would expand the Traffic Division's capacity to issue citations for speed and traffic signal violations captured by the Bureau's, by the photo enforcement programs operated by both police and transportation bureaus. The Bureau notes that the expansion of traffic safety via photo enforcement systems is expected to have the greatest impact on highest risk communities and/or high crash corridor network areas. And then finally, Prosper Portland has submitted 6 distinct programmatic requests totaling $650,000 in ongoing resources. All of these are listed on the slide. This includes $210,000 in ongoing resources for the Cannabis Business Development Program, $50,000 for additional ongoing support for Mercatus My People's Market, $150,000 ongoing for Portland Means Progress Emerging Leaders Alignment, $50,000 in ongoing resources for trade show assistance, $70,000 ongoing for Inspiring Diversity grants, $70,000 ongoing for small business internship grants, and $50,000 for additional IBRN legal support.
Question on the first one, the Cannabis Business Development Program. They're currently getting 210 ongoing, so that's for doubling the size of the program?
The Bureau
No.
is currently getting one-time support for that program. Yeah, so the funding is expiring this year.
Okay, so it's to change the one-time to ongoing. Thank
Yes.
you.
So I wanted to leave ample time for Bureau discussion. Again, I just hit the high points of the information in the request, and bureaus are here and are ready to speak to their requests, ready to answer your questions, want to facilitate the conversation in the way that it best suits you. We also did provide, for purpose of the discussion, it was a loose handout that I think was sitting on the table in front of you. Blue and white table shows what is currently assumed in terms of ongoing allocations for 2021. So to the extent that you are having a conversation around what allocations you would like to make in the 2021 process, this is what is already assumed in the budget, and assuming this $4.7 million of ongoing is what yields that available resource of $680,000 in ongoing and $127,000 in one time.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm wondering if we could have the 3 bureaus come up just so that they could answer very specific questions. Is that your pleasure at this time?
That, I think that's a great next step, if that suits
Which
council.
3?
The requested?
So there's Prosper, there's the Police Bureau, and there's the Office of Equity and Human Rights.
So not transportation?
I'm sorry?
Not transportation?
Oh, okay, 4.
They don't have
Yeah.
any, they don't have any new requests, though.
They don't have
Is that
any new
right?
requests.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sorry?
Yeah, Office of Community and Civic Life, not,
Well, I mean, I still have questions, and I'd like all the people who are getting those funds to come up. If you're in the room, it'd be nice to have representatives from each of those organizations that are getting funds, because my questions are very specific to what we told the voters and what we're actually funding.
you can sit here if you want.
So for purposes of conversation, maybe we'll start with the Bureau of Transportation, who has existing allocations but is not requesting new resources, to talk about your existing allocations, and then maybe we can go around and have folks talk about their existing allocations and their requests.
I would like a representative from each bureau that is getting cannabis dollars at the table. Thank you. Anybody who wants to start? I have some specific questions, but I think you said people are going to make a brief presentation. Is that what your desire was? Looking to our budget?
Yes.
Okay, take it away.
Direction of council, so if you want to hear about more specifics around requests, I think that would be a good use of time. Sorry.
Okay, well, I will start since I have some very specific questions. And so thank you all for being here. I think my questions are very specific. Let's go to the Cannabis Business Development Program. What is the role of the Cannabis Business Development Program, and what have been the outcomes so far of that program?
Thank you, Commissioner and Mayor.
Thank you.
My name is Torrey Campbell, Director of Economic Development, Prosper Portland, and I'm here with Executive Director Kimberly Branham. I can share a little bit with respects to the overall program over the last 2 years and some of the outcomes. And I did have a few copies if I can send it your way. I didn't make enough for everyone, my apologies, but perhaps we could share. So quickly, there's two fundamental elements to the Cannabis Business Development Program. It meets two important needs. Probably the most glaring one is going to be providing capital to entrepreneurs of color in this emerging industry. But second to that, and no less important, is also just ongoing technical assistance in terms of how to grow, how to stabilize, and how to build their businesses in a very unique and new market. So some of the outcomes to date, 2018 and 19 is where I'll start, where we received the first amount of funding for 150. Within the funding aspect of it, there were 2 grants that were provided, $30,000 each, awarded to 2 businesses that were owned by Black business owners, Green Hop and Greenbox. And we also will be able to share some of the outcomes as a result of that meaningful capital for them. So some of the impacts on the business, they were able to increase their sales by 143% within that first 4 months as a result of having an influx of cash, which again just shows you that there's oftentimes a tremendous correlation to needing to have ready funds in order to take advantage of market opportunities. They were also able to lower their cost margins by 58%. They were able to improve their search engine optimization, so that's their online presence, ranking first in position. And they were also able to hire their first employee. So with that first business, we would say that those are very positive trending outcomes with the result of utilization of the 30K.
Excuse me, could you answer a question for me?
Yes.
Any of these businesses have experience with the previous laws around cannabis consumption or possession? So basically, does anybody have convictions of marijuana convictions prior to actually getting assistance from Prosper Portland?
In terms of
and
the
these
business-
marijuana businesses that
Business
you?
owners
Yes.
themselves, I'm not aware of that. Oh,
Yes, they did.
the answer
Somebody
is yes.
said yeah?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, that's an important question
You wanna
for
show that
me,
connection, that
because for me,
nexus.
I want to make sure that we're investing in actually helping people who have been brutalized by the former policy that we had around marijuana. And so just telling me we've helped people open a business is not the whole story for me. So thank you for that. And thank you for jumping up and saying yes.
And so also in 2018 and 19, again, this is when the program started, there was a partnership that also, not only just the funding, that's a component, but also providing technical assistance. So 6 clients of that first year of color were able to participate in a 40-hour course that included 10 hours of mentoring for entrepreneurs. Partnerships also laid the groundwork for what we're now calling our Cannabis Business 101 curriculum, which they have launched this year. And then also the New School entrepreneurs achieved some key milestones within that first year of developing business plans, funding plans, and go-to-market strategies, as well as refining just their overall business modes and the elevator pitch. So that was what we had in the first year. They also were able to take meetings with 9 business owners looking to expand their product line within hemp, cannabis, and CBD spaces. So this year, 1920, the program continued to grow and developed. It also took on an additional amount. With the first year, there was 150. This year, there's 210. So on the same thrust, again, focus on access to capital activities. There were 2 $5,000 grants to Green Hop and Greenbox again this year to help with specific needs in their growth, which again is showing the need to continue to stay with those businesses that oftentimes are important, but what you really need to be able to walk with businesses over sequential years. They were also able to benefit from and receive additional services within the Inclusive Business Resource Network, which again is important to say that these businesses aren't just within their own sphere, but there's a larger network that they can begin to lean into, which I know is important to identify. Also, $45,000 in grants were given to 3 businesses, and this year there was 1 Black, Latino-owned, and 1 Native-owned, and I believe the Native-owned is the first and only Native-owned dispensary in the state of Oregon. So again, we're showing that the funding is an important component to the overall work.
You are very good. One last question, which is, how are you reaching out to community members who have been impacted by past marijuana policy so that they know that this opportunity is available?
That's great. So a lot of our work is we have our own set of kind of communication platforms that we use. But with respects to cannabis, we found that the most effective is actually working through our partners, so New Leaf Project, and the work that they're able to do to engage not only with the business community, but also communities at large, to provide both trainings, workshops, and the rest.
So for me, it would be really helpful if you tracked who actually had been impacted before, because you both were surprised when she went, yeah, right?
Yeah.
So it would be good to have that as part of the normal tracking mechanism. So I wanted to try PBOT. Thank you.
Excuse me, before you move on, could I ask?
Please.
And I think, sorry, you must have just forgotten because you were part of the steering committee and have been working with some of these businesses for quite some time. Do you have numbers on how many businesses, cannabis businesses, are owned by people of color now versus when it first started?
I don't have that information really in front of me.
But we could get it?
But we can get that, yes.
Thank you.
Free to go.
Well, we're on Prosper Portland. A couple of questions. First, is this funds, and I understand the impact on people who were impacted by the other laws, but it sounds like you're only supporting cannabis business. Are you planning to support other types of businesses for these people? Not everybody wants to be in the cannabis business.
Sure. Great question, Frida. Within this particular line item of funding, the 150 for the first year, 18-19, and then the 2010 for 19 and 20, it was designed specifically for businesses within the cannabis industry. But we've also received a larger pot of funding within the cannabis funds that actually do support businesses outside of that industry, and we can talk more about that.
I'm not a big supporter of cannabis. So the other question is, I saw within your funds for grants for businesses to attend trade shows. Do you know how many businesses have been able to utilize that fund and how much you're paying per trade show? I used to do trade shows.
Yes. So we've done our trade show program for the last 3 years, and annually we take between 4 to 6 businesses. And the overall cost, I would say, per business is between $3,000 to $5,000. And our average in terms of the results of kind of a return on investment, if you will, has been between $80,000 to $100,000 in new accounts that they've been able to garner by going to the trade shows.
Okay.
And then the participants, which is important to note, are 100% entrepreneurs of color. And I want to say about 60% of them are women. So that's an important
Yeah,
element.
I believe in trade shows. I've been to a few.
Yep. They are important to expand their markets for sure. So.
If I might just comment, when the council referred the tax to the voters, we were very specific about not limiting it only to people who had previous cannabis convictions. In fact, we thought that was really intrusive to ask people, have you had these convictions? And also that it was about the communities who are adversely impacted, particularly African American, Black Americans, Native Americans, and Hispanic, Latinx Americans. And so recognizing that those communities in general have had fewer options to wealth creation, and that we wanted to provide all kinds of support specifically to those communities and not only to people who had personally experienced the cannabis prohibition. In fact, there was a big discussion. Commissioner Novick wanted to be able to fund assistance to small construction businesses who might not be able to afford new clean diesel machines. And so, again, the language that was referred to the voters and which I campaigned on didn't promise only to help people with cannabis convictions.
I appreciate that, Commissioner. It was never my intent that I thought that was only to help those, but if we're not helping people who have been detrimentally impacted by previous public policy, why bother, right? It's like we've got to undo the harm we've done, and we've got to help businesses grow as well. I wanted to talk to PBOT about I just recently, I haven't had a chance to fully read it, but an article that actually talks about the failure of Vision Zero. And we have invested millions of dollars over the last few years from the Cannabis Fund into Vision Zero.
Thanks.
There we go.
And I'd
Thank
ask
you.
everybody to, when you speak, to
Introduce.
identify yourself.
I'm going to be really frank that we're going to have to invest millions more. We're talking about decades of investment that have gotten us to where we are today, both in the infrastructure design that we have, the traffic safety culture that we have. When Jessica mentioned that we don't have crash data that tells us what the investments have kind of yielded in terms of outcomes in the last 2 years, it's in part because we only have crash data from 2018, so we had, maybe a half of a year investment that we can actually track in crash data. But it's also because of the level of investment that is actually needed to see change on our streets. Commissioner Hardesty, I know you know the big changes that need to happen in East Portland. We're not going to see huge changes in traffic safety numbers and culture until we have made some of those investments, and that is going to take multiple years. We know that we're making a difference. We know it from the communities that are telling us that their streets are safer. We're starting to see data that we can get in the short term, like speed data. So where we've made infrastructure investments, a couple that we just got data on are the road reorganization for 102nd, for Gleason, and for Southwest Capitol. Those all had a change to the way the road was designed. Each one of them has shown really significant drops in both overall speeding, going over the speed limit, but also, and more insignificantly for safety, in the top end speeding. So those people that we know are creating dangerous conditions on the roadways, that is changing. So what we're trying to do is really track where we can see those changes in behavior, but we're going to continue to invest, and it is going to take a long time to essentially change these kind of decades of investment that have led us to where we are today.
And so what else can we do other than to continue to put tens of millions of dollars into road improvements? I mean, I can say in East Portland, one of the things that makes me crazy is you can't read the street signs. So if you don't know where you're going, it's really hard to figure it out, especially in our normally gray, dreary days. Are there other things that we are looking at? Because we're not going to have tens of millions of dollars to give the PBOT on a regular basis. So what are the other things that we can do to make it safer for people to travel in our community?
Well, some of the things that we're trying to do in the short term to improve safety, like I said, these major street designs cost multi-millions of dollars, but we're looking at significant investments in street lighting. We're also doing a lot of what we call kind of quick build safety projects. You've probably seen the left turn traffic calming, which is designed to specifically address the types of crashes that we're having at signalized intersections, mostly for pedestrians. It's a low-cost, kind of tactical improvement that we can do quickly, and we can do them all over the city. So that's the type of thing that we're trying to do to make really strategic investments that make a difference at locations all throughout the city.
Could I ask you a question? And thank you, this is helpful information. First of all, if I could just be a stickler and ask you to identify yourself for the record. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm Dana Dickman. I'm the Safety Section Manager with the Portland Bureau of Transportation. Sorry.
Awesome. We appreciate your service very much. Given that we have lots of asks and limited resources, you were very frank about what you thought it would take to see the dial really moved. Where do you think the next best dollars should go in terms of
For
addressing
Vision
traffic?
Zero?
Yeah.
What we're doing this year is we're focusing on more of those tactical safety improvements. I recognize in this work that we're talking about, a decade of investment to make street design changes. So the ask that we have this year is focused on our fatal response protocols, more of the pilot projects, and then we have a significant ask outside of the cannabis tax that's focused on lighting improvements. We know that it is related to crashes, but also it's something that we hear from community over and over again about how it affects them and their feelings of safety. So it has both a strong data-driven connection to crashes, but it's also something that community members really want to help them feel safer. that'll be part of a different discussion, but the focus is on high crash corridors in East Portland and really bringing lighting levels up to what we think is safer and will help with transit and kind of various other things that community members have said they want to help them feel safer.
Thank you. That's
Yeah.
helpful. Commissioner Daly.
Thank you, Dana. Well, as traffic commissioner and an ardent supporter of Vision Zero, I completely reject the assertion that Vision Zero is failing. The safety improvements that we have made through Vision Zero are internationally proven best practices for increasing safety. There are other contributing factors, which we rarely talk about, and I've gone on the record about this before, and I'm going to do it again, because I'm committed to pursuing this work. Number one, we don't control ODOT properties. Almost 50% of the deaths that have happened on our roads since we implemented Vision Zero have happened on ODOT properties. Those properties make up 12% of the roadways in our city. So they're roughly 4 times more deadly than Portland roads. When they're reported, of course, no one's distinguishing between a PBOT road and a state-owned facility. That is an extremely important fact in this conversation. The second major issue is that pedestrian fatalities are on the rise across the country. This is not a Portland problem, although I do think that we have high fatalities. And those deaths are being attributed to smartphones, warm weather, and SUVs. Warm weather might sound like a strange one, but warm weather encourages more nighttime driving, which also often includes drinking. So it's intoxication. We know on Portland roads that the majority of serious injuries and fatalities are caused by drivers who are speeding and/or intoxicated. So I just absolutely reject the notion that's out there that it's not worth pursuing safety improvements on our roads through engineering. That's what PBOT is mostly responsible for. But obviously education is part of it as well, and enforcement is part of it, which I think we will be hearing from the Police Bureau shortly. We don't have adequate enforcement, and I'm also working on increasing the number of radar cameras in the city, which have shown to dramatically reduce speeding and red light running. And I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you for your work. I need to point out that the 1.7 million in the cannabis tax allocation is the only funding that goes to Vision Zero. There are some maybe bits and bobs. We don't, as was mentioned, have the data for Portland, but we do have data for the statewide results of putting median crash barriers on all the interstates. And prior to that, there were multiple crossover fatalities. Since they've done the crash barriers, there have been none.
I read it in the paper, so it must be so. I read it in the paper that Vision Zero was a failure, which is why I thought it was important for me to put it on the record so that we could have a conversation. I did not expect people to be defensive and have to prove the worth of their bureau. That's not the intent of asking questions. It's to have it on the public record so people understand why we're having the conversation. Thank you, Police Bureau, for being here. Did you want to go before, please?
Since we seem to be asking questions, and I had a long list I sent to Jessica, but not enough time to get the answers for them. With PBOT, and I'm from East Portland. In fact, 2 crash corridors are very close to my house, Division and 122nd, so I drive them all the time. I do commend PBOT for the safety improvements they've made. I've had a lot of neighbors say they've really helped, especially the flashing crosses. Now, on the other side, I hear design changes on Gleason, that's all I hear is negatives because it's caused some other problems. So hopefully PBOT is working on resolving those neighborhood problems with the design change. I don't have a problem with slowing down the traffic. I love that division is 30 now instead of people going 45. So, but I noticed that you receive money for education. What are you doing in that category? I should preface it because I'll be asking this question in education. I come from education. I speak with, I'm out in East Portland all the time talking to community members. When they think of education, they think of K-12 drug and alcohol education, not other forms of education. So there's a disconnect from what the public thinks the money is spent on and what it's actually being spent on.
When we use
So-
that phrasing of education.
Yeah, and I personally feel it to be preventative is better with education than to try to do all your education after someone's already hooked on drugs. So it's just my own personal beliefs after working in that area since the 90s. So, but I'm curious what your education is.
The kind of two primary categories for Vision Zero education. One is more of a media campaign. So we've done citywide media with a focus on East Portland related to speeds. Speeds are documented as being part of 47% of our crashes. It's probably higher. That's when it's marked as either being too fast for conditions or going over the speed limit. But we know streets that were marked at 35 or 40 miles per hour, those higher speeds are contributing to crashes. So we've done 2 years of media campaigns that included billboards, bus ads, social media, and some direct communication with community groups related to the impact of speed. And then there's more focused, what more people would think of as traditional education, pedestrian safety education. We have a colleague, Sharon White, who works directly with community groups to do kind of multilingual, community-focused pedestrian, driver, and bicycle safety training. It kind of depends on what the community is focused on and where they see the greatest needs. So some examples are she did a pedestrian safety walk with seniors from ERCO. She's done a couple of events with, again, safety walks where actually some music was translated about pedestrian safety into Russian, and there had some singers that walked along on the safety walk, so something for the Slavic community, and it's a wide variety of safety-focused education depending on the community need.
So you know we appreciate Sharon's work out in East Portland. We like her.
Yes, great.
Could I ask one question related to what Frida asked, and maybe you sort of answered it already, but in terms of public awareness campaigns, what do we know works? What are the messages that seem to have the biggest impact? And if we're investing, where should we be investing in terms of messaging?
Simple and consistent messaging is what we know works. We've been working with some of our peer cities related to what works for Vision Zero. Vision Zero is relatively new to the U.S., and what we know from both working with media partners who do this, PBOT is not an expert in media campaigns. We're trying to learn from people who are. That having consistent messages over multiple years is most effective, which is why we've done 2 years focused on speed, and we're planning on doing a 3rd year focused on speed. Unfortunately, humans have to hear it many times before it sinks in many ways. We've also heard that the variable message signs are really impactful. National Highway Safety has done research on how people respond to those variable message signs, and so you've seen us using those at fatal response sites. We also used them in collaboration with PPB as part of the DUI enforcement around the holidays, and so we're really looking to where there's data that shows kind of specific tactical things are proven by experts outside of PBOT and using those tactics as much as possible.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Civil life, I am curious as to whether or not the cost for a license covers the expenses if you open a dispensary. Do you know what the cost is?
Just want to distinguish that the fees from licensing is separate from the tax allocation. Do you want us to?
Good afternoon, ma'am. What's your name?
Okay, I'm sorry. Sue Creek, Director of the Office of Community and Civic Life. And Commissioner Hardesty, you asked about licensing fees, which is a separate source of revenue for funding the activities of the cannabis licensing and compliance, separate from the tax allocation. So would you like?
That
me
is
to maybe
correct.
follow-
I asked that question first because that's going to lead me to my second question, but I was just,
Okay.
a curiosity
So the-
question came up, yeah.
Does the cost, do the fees, if you could restate, do the fees cover the cost of
Of
staffing?
the program.
It is a cost recovery program. Currently, we are conducting a market study because the revenue in the first several years is higher than what we've needed to do the licensing and regulation and compliance. And so, and also in the first couple of years, we've actually reduced the fee, come back to council and reduce the fee. And so we know that the market is emerging, and we know that the first and second and third years of emerging market may look different. And there are also state and federal laws that are impacting the growth or the contraction of the industry. And so we need a proper market study, which we are conducting, to see if our fee structure is fair. Our point is not to make money off of the industry. It is just simply to recover the cost, to provide the added value that our city program provides to the industry. Did I answer your question?
Yes, that was a very thorough answer to my question. Thank you. So what does it cost to get a license?
Would you, there are several types, depends on what type of producer you are, and Christina Corsi is our licensing coordinator, interim supervisor, she can answer that for us.
Hi, Christina Corsi, thank you. The annual cost of the license depends on the license type. The majority of the licenses, which would be retailer, producer, or processor, and wholesalers, $3,500. If you're a micro producer or a retail courier, it would be $1,000
Is that one time only or per year?
annually.
Annually, thank you.
Annually, huh?
Do you want to talk a little bit about the?
And do we know the percent, I think maybe Commissioner Fritz asked this question and I missed it. Do we know the percentage of marijuana businesses that are owned by people of color?
We do not have that data currently. We are also hoping to obtain that through the market study.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the answer to those questions. And last but not least, hi, Portland Police.
Commissioner Hardesty, I have a few questions, but
Oh,
I'm also, we might as well keep them here.
Come back.
First of all, you show that, I believe it's your bureau that handles the expungement, that funded through you or housing? Because it seems to be said in two different bureaus. Okay, because I'm really for this, and I'm wondering for $100,000, how many people are actually getting their records expunged? Do we know?
Musical chairs.
That's okay.
Kimie Weoka, Office of Community and Civic Life, Cannabis Program. So the first year, we, Metropolitan Public Defenders received a grant for $154,000. And they, and one of the big things that has come out of this grant and this work, especially around expungement, is some really important lessons around not only doing the outreach and providing the preliminary services. So they provided preliminary services to over 1,000 people. And that would be kind of doing education and preparing initial documentation. And I have some, they provide services to over 1,000 people, but at the point of the report that I have, and I apologize, I don't have the full year one end report, but they exceeded their expected outcomes in that grant year. But what they did find was that only about 200 individuals had eligible expungements, and of that, an even smaller percentage were able to complete the entire expungement process. And some of the barriers they discovered through this grant and through these studies, like the one that's happening with Portland Housing Bureau as well, was to find that there are other existing barriers and that individuals going through this process need full wraparound support to make it through the whole process, because there are so many pieces that even once you walk out the door with that stack of paperwork, you have certain fines or fees that may not have been able to have been waived. You have barriers with, I believe it's a like $80 required fingerprinting fee that can't be waived at all. And so these are things in subsequent years we have been able to identify and hopefully in subsequent applications that they're building in to a pocket of money to provide those additional like case management. And other organizations have actually stepped up to identify and provide those services. So there are a lot of great networks and partnerships that have come out of that investment specifically around expungement.
Yeah, thank you, because that is a barrier to housing, it's a barrier to jobs. So to me, it's important that they be able to do that. Let's see. Oh, I know. You're tracking the businesses, I take, that are here. Do you track where those businesses are located? I'm from East Portland, and I'll tell you, every time I turn around, I see another green cannabis shop. And so I'm curious, I know there's some requirements, they have to be, I believe, 1,000 feet from a school and 1,000 feet apart or something like that. But is that enough of a criteria, because they're really getting clustered in East Portland? And I'm curious how many businesses are in East Portland versus the other neighborhood coalitions.
So we do have that data, and it's broken down by neighborhood associations, and it's also further broken down by license type. I do not have that data with me, but it is available.
If I could
can
get that, I
provide
would
you.
appreciate it. The other one is having to do with your growers, especially the ones that are in buildings. There's supposed to be some requirement. Cannabis growers, the place smells. I mean, it's really bad. I happened to have, years ago in my commercial building, an illegal grow. It took months to get rid of that smell. It turns out next to my commercial building is a grower, and the smell is quite strong there. Is there anything that is required so the livability of that neighborhood, or whether it's a commercial neighborhood, isn't impacted by the smell of those growers' operations?
Yes, so per our code, we do have strict air filtration requirements. So therefore, odor does not impact the livability of the community. So if there is a problematic location, we would like to be known about it, because then we could do something about it.
I would appreciate it if you send me that information, because it is impacting the gateway area where we're trying to get businesses going in that area.
Also, to add to that, as of January 1st, 2020, there will be no further producer applications or licensees in the state of Oregon.
If
What
you could send
happens-
that data to all of us, that would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, it would be great for all of us. I don't think East Portland has any more pot shops than inner southeast or northeast Portland. They are everywhere. We have more pot shops than churches now, so.
I was thinking they might want to revisit what they allow, maybe so many in a census tract. I can't think of anything else that would be able to do it, so
for
there's too
you, this is a
many.
good conversation, but we have to stick to budgetary items or we'll never get through the entirety of the budget. It's an important issue, but I would encourage an offline conversation. Commissioner Daly.
Just a couple quick comments. Sorry, I'm juggling like 5 different things right now. Did you talk at all about our social equity program and how a couple years ago we lowered the license fees and all of that?
So we do have a social equity license fee reduction program that is different from the social equity grants.
Yes.
On 2 different occasions, aside from when licenses were first set at $49.75, we did lower them. The first time we lowered them was to $41.75, and then the second time was to $3,500. We do have the license fee reduction, which is open to all of our applicants. There's 3 different requirements that need to be met, one of 3 at least. It would be self-identifying as a small business, and that would include having a total combined income of $750,000 or less and holding no more than 3 active or pending state licenses. Another one would be contracting goods and services through a state-certified minority-owned, women-owned, or small emerging business. And the third one would be prior cannabis conviction to June 1st, 2015, July 1st.
Thank you. I like to highlight our focus on restorative justice. I think it's something that gets overlooked quite a bit, and it's important work that we're doing through civic life. And then I always like to take every opportunity I can to talk about expungement. And while I certainly support using cannabis dollars for expungement, I believe the state should deal with this issue. It was the state that prohibited cannabis use, and it was the voters of Oregon that overturned it. It's expensive, time-consuming process. As you mentioned, people face a lot of barriers to getting the expungement, and we have very limited dollars that we could be spending on deeper equity work, creating greater economic opportunity in particular, but a lot of it is being used up by efforts, expungement efforts.
Our program is currently in conversation with Code for PDX, which is derived out of Code for America, and they just recently expunged 66,000 case files in Los Angeles. So we're having the first conversation with them tomorrow.
I understand one of the state challenges is that we only have digital records that go 10 years back. And so the process of expunging records older than that would be very time-consuming. But that's not really our problem.
We could still get them to waive those non-waivable fees and things like that. I absolutely support you, and I think we should put that near the top of our agenda for next year.
Well, and yeah, I'm totally on board with that as well. It does seem crazy that we are spending money to help people clear up a record that clearly the state law has changed. And I know that we have also had the Urban League and Rosewood Initiative also doing expungement clinics. And so what we're doing is sending people through hoops that we shouldn't necessarily need to send people through. I wanted to ask the Police Bureau before we ran out of time whether or not they have started any training programs based on the allotment of dollars from the Cannabis Fund. Last year when we spoke, it seemed like that we had just replaced general fund dollars with cannabis dollars, and so I just want to know what's been different over the last year.
I'm Stephanie Lorenko, Captain of the Traffic Division. As far as a specific allotment for training, we've been doing training, but how it's getting paid, I would need Ken Lee to speak to that. So which I'm not sure that.
So I'm really referring to, as the ballot measure language says, that we're training people on alcohol and drug, training officers to be able to identify people who are inebriated as part of the dollars that were set aside for this particular program. And I know when we talked about this last year during budget, what we realized is that there had been no additional trainings. I know you get some federal dollars for training that are DUI-specific dollars, but I'm talking very specific to the cannabis dollars that are supposedly used for that purpose as well.
And if I could just add to that, the assertion was made when we were looking at how to allocate what we put on the ballot was that although you have breathalyzers and blood tests for alcohol, there aren't any tests for cannabis inebriation, and so that the officers needed to get special training to be able to cite people.
Yes, ma'am. So the answer to that is yes. In the last year, we've done specialized training for DUI detection. We always do a recertification to operate the intoxilizer, the equipment that is used for that. We also have more advanced roadside DUI detection training that we've done. We did all of that in this last year. The bulk of that leading up to our holiday enforcement schedule that we were putting on, but it is something that we will continue doing. We have started continuing doing this year when we have new officers that we're trying to bring into the traffic division and get them ride certified and certified in other areas where if those positions are allocated to me, they will be ready to come in and work immediately.
And that is in addition to the federal dollars you get for DUI training already, right? Because you get a couple of grants a year that's specifically around DUI training. This is supposedly enhancing that training, right? Some additional training on top of that. That's what I'm just trying to be clear of.
Yeah, that's correct. The big training, the real expensive training that we get the most help with is drug recognition expert training. That's to detect other than alcohol, whether it be cannabis or something else, and that also requires a high level of maintenance to remain certified, and so we do get some assistance for that.
And can you give me a figure of how many officers have gone through this new training? And is it just traffic control, or is it also a broader training?
Last year, we had, I believe, 16 officers. I believe it was 16 officers in our training overall. They were all segmented to different types of training. And those were officers that were not permanently assigned to the traffic division. So those were in addition to.
Thank you.
You might not know this off the top of your head, but I would be interested in knowing how many people have been cited for driving while under the influence of cannabis and what percentage of overall DUIs those make up. Oh, she might have that information?
This question comes up with some frequency.
And are they driving 20 miles under the speed limit?
So to cannabis specific, of course, I can't say to that. But what I can say is that DUI drugs for 2019-2020, there were 11 arrests for that. Now, 25 additional arrests for DUI were undetermined, and what that means is that the person under arrest would neither submit to a breath test, nor would they submit to a DRE examination, and we did not have a circumstance where we could do a warrant for a blood draw. So that those additional 25 very well could have been cannabis, but though that's the total number.
How many for alcohol?
For alcohol, last year was 138.
Okay, that makes more sense, yeah.
That scared me there. I was like,
And
The first one was other drugs.
And I think what's important to understand about that is we start with, unless we just get some sort of evidence on the beginning of the contact, we start with at the alcohol. If we get an alcohol test completed and it is over the legal limit, we don't pursue farther to find out what else is part of it. People typically aren't always going to be just doing one thing, but once we know that we have an alcohol crime, we stop with that.
Why is that, just out of curiosity?
I don't really have a detailed answer for that right now. I know that the drug recognition expert part of the exam is very detailed. It's very extensive, and just through the court process, that has been sort of the procedure that the courts have lined out for us and that we've been following, because it's going to be a DUI at that point, whether it's DUI alcohol or finding out that there's additional substances on board does not make it a difference when it comes to the outcome later on.
I see, that makes sense. Thank you.
So I'm surprised it's not that many alcohol arrests. It's like only one every 2 days, and we know that there's more people driving around drunk than one every 2 days.
I would agree with that, yes.
When you pull somebody over for speeding, are you allowed to do a drug test?
drunk test?
Or either drug or drunk.
Well, officers, traffic officers in particular, when they stop someone for any of the violations, this is what they do. They're on the alert for that. And if they find reason to take the next step and start to inquire, then they will do that. And so the reasons for that can be varied. Maybe it was their driving. Well, there are types of driving behaviors that by themselves are indicative of DUI. Not maintaining your lane, driving down the road at night with no lights on, some things like that. If they get up to the driver and they smell alcohol, of course, that's an obvious giveaway. But if they have any combination of things, perhaps the person is slurring the words, or perhaps their eyes are bloodshot. There's all sorts of things that they look for, and they also have to make sure that if they do have these indicators, that it's not a medical issue, right? And so they will start asking these questions and work through the problem until they realize that they need to start asking the person to do more things.
Interesting, thank you.
And I just want to say thank you. You have always been just nothing but information. I appreciate the fact that when you don't have the answer, you say you don't know. It's been a pleasure to get to know you over the last couple of years, because I think you're pretty awesome at what you do, and I can trust the information that you provide to me. So thank you for that. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Captain. So it's about 20% is the ones that are drug-related DUI, I think, if my math is right. My question is, in terms of training, does the department needs more training around recognizing drug behavior for DUI because you suspect there's much more, or just because we should do it?
So the question is, do I think we need more training? And I don't think we need more training. We have not ever had someone stop that we thought was under the influence of drugs where we could not do the drug recognition evaluation. We've always been able to meet that demand. And if there's not someone currently on duty in the Portland Police Bureau, we partner with our surrounding agencies to help. And then we, as a last resort, we have a sort of a hotline phone number so someone can just show up and do that if they were off duty. So it's not that we need more training. What we need is more people. We need more people to be doing proactive enforcement and DUI detection, particularly at night.
And because it's challenging getting more people, what kind of changes are you making to ensure that we still have a safe street, that people can have confidence they're not going to be running into people under the influence?
Well, at the traffic division, my scope of influence is limited to the people that I have and the partners that I get to work with. So we're trying to maximize that effort. PBOT has been a great partner with us, and we rely on their expertise on where to work, and we try to focus our limited resources where they're needed the most. We have a volunteer program, and speaking of East Portland, for the citizen radar, that's the only place they operate is East Portland. And then we message all that out through our various social media platforms as best as possible. And then when we have events, we have other partners that we rely upon, both in the community and the state, like with ODOT. And we get grants to help pay for certain needs that we can't meet ourselves. You're welcome.
Do we have anybody from police here who can talk about the service coordination team?
Don't die now.
I'm sorry.
Do we have anybody from the police bureau who can talk about the service coordination team?
I don't think so.
Okay, thank you.
So at this time, it sounds like most bureaus have had a chance to talk about their existing allocations. If council would like to hear more detail about any of the requests, you may ask bureaus to provide more information on their requests. Otherwise, we are actually running ahead of schedule. I'll pause, see if anybody wants to hear from, so again, Prosper has a handful of requests. Civic Life has requested ongoing resources for their social equity grant program. And Police Bureau has a request for an enhancement of their traffic division.
Well, we're a little ahead of schedule. Why don't we hear briefly on those two proposals?
Why don't we start with Prosper?
Good afternoon. Kimberly Branham with Prosper Portland, Executive Director. So as Jessica mentioned, we have a number of requests, and you'll hear in the next few days the broader context of our overall budget. But these were items that were prioritized with our Budget Advisory Committee to support our economic development objectives in line with the priorities expressed through the Cannabis Fund. So Tori can go through, but they are ranked in order. So our top priority is to continue supporting businesses, cannabis businesses at the $210,000 level. And then to augment our Mercatus and My People's Market programming. Tori can talk about that. And then our third is to expand our partnership with emerging leaders. So those are the order that we have. Tori, do you want to dig into it?
Sure. I'll take a few moments to talk about each one, and if there's additional questions, please let me know, because we have quite a few of them. So to start, the cannabis one, it's something we've already talked about, so it's pretty straightforward. I think it's just the continuation of the existing work that we are doing to support emerging businesses within the cannabis industry. We're currently doing that through a great partnership with New Leaf Project. And so we're asking, at this point, as you know, we've been receiving kind of one-time funding. So in this case, we're asking for ongoing for that program so that we can always have an important role in the participation of strengthening those businesses within that industry. The next in order of priority would be the Mercatus, which supports the My People's Market as well, which is, again, providing opportunities for entrepreneurs of color both to receive a platform in terms of visibility. So this has everything to do with accessing new markets, which is an important integral part of growing your business and community. And we've seen these fundings really drive home the opportunities to increase visibility through partnership with Travel Portland, with My People's Market as an example. Last year we did receive funding for $100K, 50 of that was ongoing, and 50 of that was one time. And so the program has shown tremendous progress and outcomes, and so we are just asking that that one-time 50 is now transitioned to 50 ongoing for the support of that program overall. Portland Means Progress, obviously it's an initiative of the mayor to really create opportunities for the private sector to engage and support not only businesses that are run by entrepreneurs of color, but also to support youth, in this case, young folks who are in college, who are seeking opportunities to work within private sector companies through the experience of an internship. So this ask of $150,000 would be to work in collaboration with an existing partnership with the contingent through their Emerging Leaders Internship Program, which offers internships for youth that are in college or in graduates that are people of color, and that's a unique element. So this would help to really create a stronger tracking system over the next 4 to 5 years. Oftentimes we do wonder within internships, we can have the important outcome of the moment that they were able to participate, but how does it transition towards them seeking ongoing employment opportunities? And so really the unique piece of this ask is not only to help with existing programming, but also to create those data tracking points over the next 4 to 5 years. The next one is a trade show assistance. I've already had a chance to talk a little bit about it for Frida's questions of the importance of accessing new markets. We are asking for $50,000 for ongoing to, again, support this important gap within the small to medium-sized businesses that are led by women and entrepreneurs of color, to be able to expand into new markets. And most of our trade shows tend to be outside of the state. So it's really helping businesses, and in essence, become traded sector by being able to have opportunities to go beyond the borders of Oregon to find new markets where their products and services that are being created and supported here in the city can spread. The next one, and you can stop me if you like, I'll just keep it moving though, is the Inspiring Diversity Grants Program, which is, you could say we have a program and ask for almost everything, but we never want to be short, knowing that there's so many opportunities and ways in which to support both the gaps and challenges in our city. So the Inspiring Diversity Grant is a $70,000 ask ongoing. This allows businesses that otherwise lack the funding. So we're often talking about small to mid-sized businesses within our traded sector, cluster industries, to tap into funds that can help to leverage or be catalytic with respects to helping them do some of the diversity, inclusion, and equity work within a particular company. And we've already seen some really positive early starts and outcomes as a result of this program. The Small Business Internship Program, and similar in that it's providing, again, opportunities for internships for youth and at the professional development as a result of receiving some small but kind of catalytic startup funds for mid to small sized businesses. And then the last but not least is, again, wanting to continue to broaden our legal support within the Inclusive Business Resource Network. We already have a tremendous partnership with the Small Business Legal Clinic. And I would say one of the resources that gets used pretty quickly in any given fiscal year is legal services. And so our desire is to be able to expand that work through the request of these $50,000. Again, all of these funds are a bit of the important and necessary, but they are a wish list, if you will, and we've arranged them in order of priority. So our top one being cannabis and moving its way down to the last. Thank you.
I'd just say I thought you were giving us a list of the priorities and also going through what have the outcomes been. That was very persuasive to me. Thank you.
Well, the Office of Community and Civic Life is requesting $1 million in ongoing resources. Today, we've only received one-time resources. We believe that our social equity grant-making program really fits the spirit of the ballot measure, especially the last part of the third priority, and providing economic opportunity and education to communities disproportionately impacted by cannabis prohibition. I believe you understand the purpose and the spirit of our work, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time there. So I'll point to some of the important differences that ongoing versus one-time support provides. So ongoing support also allows us to not only have the staff capacity, but actually keep building that trust with communities. If we build up capacity, then sunset and then disappear and then come back years later, that is not a helpful opportunity to build relationships with communities who want to know if we're going to be a long-term partner for them. Secondarily, previous years, we've had the pleasure of redirecting some of those dollars to Prosper, but Prosper deserves their own one-time and ongoing support, and it just makes more sense to have Prosper dollars going to Prosper and Civic Life dollars going to Civic Life, so that's an important distinction in our request. And then maybe, perhaps most importantly, its impact. There's only limited impact you can make when you only can count on one-time resources. And so the impact, our ability to set long-term goals with community members is actually something to be gained with ongoing support. We believe that in our social equity framework, it includes, not limited to, but includes at least three important parts. It does start with the licensing and the regulation, and it does include the institutional policy change that we spoke to earlier, especially around expungement and who was responsible for that. But it absolutely must include the reinvestment in communities, individuals harmed by cannabis prohibition for generations. And so I would only conclude to say it just makes a whole lot of sense for us to be able to do all those things through the city's cannabis program for our community partners.
So, Sue, I'm curious, when I look at kind of the grant recipients and the type of grants that you supported in the last funding round, I guess my question would be, why would those dollars not come from other pots that we have, like with the Constructing Hope and Vos Work Education Center and POIC? All I would assume would be getting funding from contractors and work that's supporting people to get through pre-apprenticeship, apprenticeship, and on to journeyman status. It just feels, so my question would be, just because those are the groups that were highlighted that got grants, why would we be giving those, why would we be using cannabis dollars for those kind of businesses when we already have city dollars set aside for those kind of businesses to do that kind of development? What value are we adding with the cannabis dollars?
Do you want to start? Okay. Well, I would never say that a community partner should only have one bureau partner within the city. So yes, we would generally support that. They could earn support through other bureaus. And then in terms of what is the value from going through this cannabis area of work, perhaps for those partners, this is the cannabis tax allocation might fund a specific focus that maybe some of their other dollars would not allow. I think it also helps us for those organizations coming through the cannabis program, maybe that we could demonstrate a body of work around what it would take to support reparative and restorative justice. So maybe we could build a body of programmatic evidence that maybe would not be evident through workforce development or other contracting.
I'm just always worried that we're not communicating enough to know what resources the city sends to various nonprofit organizations, and so we operate from a very narrow perspective based on what we have in front of us. But when I look at organizations who I know that there are different city pots that they should have access to, and if they don't have access to those pots, that's another conversation, right? But when I look at groups that I know are basically in the construction business, and I know that we've just set aside, a couple of $1 million to actually address that, then it just makes me wonder just how much we're talking internally about what resources should support what businesses, because, because I don't think we do a good job of that. So I asked that question because I thought, well, maybe this is something different outside of their normal work, and it doesn't sound like we know whether or not that would be so.
That's a very fair point, and also in terms of the areas where this would support around reentry housing and also case management, you're very right. As the program continues, could we find more targeted and more focused uses for the dollars? I think that's a very logical next step.
Thank you. And then I wanted to go back to something Commissioner Fritz said earlier about the service coordination team. My understanding is there are 2 positions that are funded in Portland Police Bureau. One is an officer and one is a social worker through the service coordination team, but there was no ask for us to continue to fund that. And it was funded by one-time money for a long time, but that's another conversation.
I think it was put into ongoing funding when we raised the business tax. The question is, should it be ongoing general fund or should it be ongoing cannabis tax?
Who raised the business tax? Is this prior to my arrival when you
Yeah.
did it for something else?
Yeah.
That was you? Okay.
So I do think, since we don't have anybody from the service coordination team here, I think we should look at that. I really want to have it in ongoing funding, and as I said, particularly safe ongoing funding, which general fund is less safe, because we know if we go into a recession, our fees and taxes from pleasures are going to go up as they do in recessions. So I do think we need to have that conversation as to whether we should do a switch. The question I have for Civic Life is, it's taken a while to get the grants program up and running, and we were just able to get that money out of the door in October of 19 with expected results in 8 to 10 months. I am concerned about allocating ongoing funding before we've had any kind of results from those grants to find out what the outcomes are. What would you respond to that concern?
Kimie Ueoka, Office of Community Civic Life. Do I have to do it every time? Oh, sorry.
The question is, why would we put money in ongoing resources when we don't have any results from the one-time resources yet?
So we do have year 1, which was administered by OMF. They have completed their 2 of their 3 awardees have closed out and completed their first year. The 2 who have closed out with outcomes beyond what they had anticipated or had expected. And I apologize, I don't have the year-end numbers in front of me.
Yeah, if you could
from
get us
OMF,
that
yes.
information, that would be
I will.
helpful to us as we move forward. Thank you.
Yes.
And then the other question I have for you is we only have 380,000 ongoing and 127,000 one time. So I'm wondering what you thought should be money taken out of in order to do a 1 million allocation to Civic Life.
I think that's your decision to make, what the right balance is, and where the priorities are for the city. And we're putting forth our best representation of where community reinvestment should lie with a third priority, but that's really your wisdom to determine.
Yeah, I definitely support increasing the allocation for the third bucket ongoing. I think Prosper has provided us with outcomes for the first 2 years of their, hang on a second, I'll get it right. The top two. Got so much information in here, I can't find it.
If I may also add, one of the primary pieces of feedback that we have gotten from the communities and the community organizations that we have worked with and those who have applied thus far to the social equity grants, one of the resounding pieces of feedback is a hesitation in applying and standing up entire programs that are designed to be, and with the expectation that they are trying to be transformative in people's lives without the possibility of assured funding for even one subsequent year.
But then is your program designed to do ongoing funding to particular grantees? Or would it be? Because normally in a grant process each year there's new applications and you evaluate them all, rather than having each grantee having the expectation, I'm going to get this for 3 years, 5 years.
Yes, but for this area of work, their ability to rely on, there will be a pot of funding to compete for. I think that was the level surety, not like a guarantee that
But
you'd
not
be funding it
particular.
every single year.
Okay.
And then I would also say that maybe it's not a too important a point to make, but when you've only received one-time allocations and to stand up a program very quickly, we haven't had maybe the ability to think about the long-term impact that if you've been seeing long-term support. So I'm just saying that maybe it's slightly apples and crab apples, expecting a program that only has received one-time allocation to be in a position to be able to say, compete with other programs that have had a reasonable assurance of ongoing support. It is a different mindset of what we can accomplish and how quickly and what kind of commitments and even imagination that we allow ourselves to put forward.
Yeah, I think normally if we were going to be putting ongoing resources into something, we'd like to have more data on what exactly that's going to go for and what the expected outcomes would be.
We have had the mid-year reports from the year 2 grantees because it was a compressed cycle, and 5 of the 6 are on track to meet their expected outcomes within that compressed cycle even, and one has asked for an extension.
Great.
Based
And how
on
much
some-
money was that you got out in the first year cycle?
That's the first. This is the yeah. So for year 2, we have 631,321.
Okay. Thank you. So yes, if you could get me that data, get all of us that data, I think that would be helpful as
can
we
write that up.
move forward in making the decision. Thank you very much for your work.
I do have one last question. The auditor spoke about not having a clear budget and fees based on a strategy that you were trying to implement when it relates to the cannabis program. I'm just wondering if any changes have happened since the last audit report came out, and if so, what changes now give us the vision about whether or not the budget and fees are based on a strategy of the law itself, right? Like, so what's the plan? Like, why do we have a program, and what's the strategy? And again, is that strategy based on the budget and fees or workload?
So during the audit itself, they were aware that we were conducting the market study, which would be an important part of our ability to strategize going forward. Also, we have to remind ourselves, this is a relatively new industry. It's only become legal recreational. It's only been law for 3 or 4 years now. And so and every year is slightly different. So actually now we have 3 or 4 years of data that actually we can look at the market growth, saturation, and maybe other factors. So for us, we felt like we needed, we couldn't the first year alone or the second year alone was not enough data to say this is where the industry is going. And so the fact that we have now trending data, we will have a market study results, and then we also have the benefit of also our cannabis policy oversight team, where we have industry leaders also informing us about the nature of the work. If you can measure it, it has already happened, and so sometimes you also have to, in a new industry, include different sources of data and input. So what we're saying is that all of those elements are about to converge, but the market study has not delivered that yet, and that will be this spring, and we'll be in a better position to determine the fees and also where we think the market might go, because also there have been changes in state laws and also federal interest or lack of federal interest in our cannabis industry. So there are many things. So I don't have a complete answer for you today, but with the market study piece, we should have more answers after this spring.
Do you expect the market study to be done in the spring?
Yes, it's already been, it took us a while to contract that out, and it's being conducted right now. I believe May 2020 is when the results will be delivered, and just going to look over to, is that right? May 2020.
Has gone up and down in the back. All right, thank you.
I have one more question for transportation under the commissioner in charge. Often what we've done in the past is put one-time money partly into the grants program in civic life because it was just getting started, but we've also generally allocated some one-time money for transportation improvements, specific ones, because I agree that we should have ongoing money for programs that are expected to continue. Capital expenses in Vision Zero are one-time things that we could it would seem to me that that can be an appropriate way to spend one-time money. And so I'm just wondering why there wasn't a request for any kind of one-time projects in transportation.
That was probably the budget direction when we started.
Yeah, that's true. Also, the fiscal year associated with the cannabis tax doesn't align super well with construction year. So as we've been trying to make sure that we know how much we need in cannabis tax, a lot of times construction projects are happening over 2 or 3 years, especially large construction projects, and they'll happen over the course of a couple of fiscal years. So if you recall, last year we actually had a rollover from 17-18 that we're spending this year, and it was really just trying to be really clear about what we can spend out in each fiscal year. And because we had that rollover, that's what we focused on getting completed.
And
there's no lack of need.
I mean, I guess the only thing that I would add to that is, although the projects are discrete, we have millions and millions of dollars of these projects. So to me, that makes sense to ask for ongoing funding for that. $1 billion in deferred maintenance.
Yeah, I'm not questioning the need for the ongoing. I'm just saying if there's any leftover one time, and obviously I won't be here to have that conversation next year, although I might.
If there's ever any left over, I'm sure we can build something.
That's what I figured. Thank you.
I don't anticipate it, but yeah.
Never.
Mayor, can I add something? So Commissioner, also, there were 2 projects that the Bureau submitted as part of the capital set-aside request that I think I would classify as safety improvements. One is Southeast Foster signals and lighting upgrades on Southeast 110th and Southeast 111th and Southeast Foster. That's $1 million request. And then there was a West Burnside signal upgrade request. So updating the intersections at West Burnside, at Southwest 2nd and Southwest 3rd. And that's a $2 million capital set-aside request.
Okay. Thank you.
Very good. So, Director Kennard, we have about 1 more hour left. Is that what you're suggesting?
So it's 2:40. We have, I had scheduled this session to conclude at 3, and then we would have a 15-minute break, and special appropriations would start at 3:15. We'll note that the Traffic Division has not spoken specifically to their request, but if you feel like it was covered as part of their earlier discussion, then we can break now. But we have essentially until 3:15. We'll reconvene, have special appropriations give the Bureau give a brief presentation, followed by special requesters' presentations on their requests.
Well, I'm certainly not opposed to taking our break early, but if people have questions related to traffic safety or traffic enforcement before these fine folks disappear and do their job. Is there any
We
other?
were talking about specific requests. Do
Right.
they have ongoing requests?
They have a request for, it's 134,000, I
154.
believe, somewhere in that range,
one officer.
for one officer.
Yeah, I did see that.
And can we start special appropriations at 3 instead of 3:15?
Yeah, I would propose we'd start early.
As long as we
Yeah,
have
just-
staff
We
here,
take
that's-
15 minutes and then start early.
Yep, staff can start early. We do have members of the public that are coming that have submitted requests for special appropriations.
Okay.
Some of them may not be here until 3:15, but we can certainly start with
Well,
our
we'll
bureau staff
Yeah, we'll
and see what
still
we can
be
get through.
talking by 3:15, I guarantee you. Good, all right, thank you, everyone. This is
everybody.
great discussion. Thank you all for being here. We appreciate it. We are adjourned until, why don't we say till 3 PM?
to start by orienting everybody again to the giant binder. Take your giant binder, take it to the red tab at the back, work session materials. We are on the tab following the Cannabis Fund work session, Special Appropriations tab. So draw your attention to the one-page document that shows high-level information, budgetary information by bureau. Special Appropriations is a special division within the Office of Management and Finance. Its adopted budget in the current year totals $13.6 million. It's the 17th largest total budget out of 28 bureaus. The general fund allocation for special appropriations in the current year totals $13.3 million, which makes it the 8th largest general fund appropriation out of 26 bureaus. Here you can see below the requested budget allocations. I think notably under the expense category, you can see that the majority, almost 88% of the expenses at $11.9 million goes to external materials and services, and that's primarily because this is grant making. Most of these resources go out the door to special appropriations. You can see here a trend line around total staffing levels, and the current 2021 requested staffing level is about 9.6 FTE. And then you see the programs, the top 3 largest programs within special appropriations is RAC, followed by some grouping of external-facing programs and the Office of Youth Violence Prevention. So with that, I will turn it over to Sheila Craig to give a presentation on special appropriations.
Does that mean I don't have to introduce myself now? So I'm Sheila Craig from the Grants Management Division, and Jessica pretty much covered mostly everything I was going to cover, with the exception of the decision points for special appropriation and the key changes. So I think I'll focus on those two things. And for the decision points, we have representatives here to come up and do a little presentation on the decision package and answer any questions on those. So I think I'll focus on the key changes right now, which are, we have 2 of those. And one is we're in the process of implementing a grants management system, and we're working with multiple bureaus across the city so we can use this citywide. And we're working with Civic Life, Children's Levy, Clean Energy Fund, Smart Cities, BES, EPAP, Portland Housing Bureau, and then the Grants Management Division. And the reason we're doing this is because when we took on special appropriations, we realized that we don't have a good system citywide to track outgoing grants, and we don't have the ability to report back to council all of the funding that's going out to the same organizations in many situations. So we thought it would be good to have a tool to be able to track that citywide. So we're currently reviewing RFPs and trying to make a decision on who we're going to contract with for that system. Our goal is to implement it by the end of the fiscal year, but it's looking like we'll probably push into next fiscal year to complete that implementation. The other key change to special appropriations is we're working with a budget office to develop performance measures for special appropriations. So this will be the first year that we actually will have performance measures for special appropriations. So with that, we have 6 decision points, and those are for charter review, PIN 1, PUA, Innovation Law Lab, Rose Festival, council transition. And actually, council transition, we've found funding to support that, so we don't have to make a decision on that, but it was included in the requested budget, so we did want to include it on the list.
And I was glad to hear you mention Rose Festival Foundation, because that's not actually in our handouts. But I did put in a request for ongoing money for the Rose Festival Foundation for $100,000, and I did it on time.
So where do the other ones come from, like Last Thursday and Clean and Safe, and how did these things just pop up?
These are all considered ongoing special appropriations, so they're included in the Cal target every year.
Oh, so why?
Last year, I think we had a conversation about the potential to review the ongoing special appropriations. And I think at this time, the budget work session, the requested budget is the only opportunity where there's a review of the ongoing special appropriations. These are council mandated programs. They're not programs that are managed by the Office of Management and Finance. We just We administer these programs, but council makes the decision on these programs.
And when does the council make the, I mean, is there a process whereby I should know about this before I'm asked to vote on it? And is this it?
Just the requested budget, yes.
Ah, all right. I mean, because when it's presented as ongoing, it's as if I have no vote or opinion on whether or not it's something we should be funding.
We always get to vote, Commissioner.
Well, I mean, but today, so we're just hearing the presentation. We're not making any decisions today. Is that correct?
No decisions, right. So
Very
if you see
good.
something where you want follow-up, or if you want to offer, assuming this makes it into the executive budget or the proposed budget, sorry, wrong side of the river. The proposed budget, one can always introduce an amendment to pull something out if it's in ongoing.
Thank you. Yeah, there's some that I'd love to just know what it is and why we're funding it, right? Yeah. All right.
Totally fair.
If there are no more questions about this part, then we'll move on to the decision points, and we'll have,
Dr. Smith.
sorry.
She's trying hard to put that thing.
It's almost a torturous effort.
I thought you were just playing with your cards.
She has not practiced this, folks. This is live.
Okay, quick question, and Commissioner Fritz, we've talked a little bit about this, but this is just some more background. So PSEP, so we currently have the staff and the administrative components of PSEP, and so I just want a better understanding of like, because it can be a bit cumbersome.
Excuse me, can you spell out, say
Oh,
out
PSEP. Portland Committee on Community Engaged Policing. Thank you. Part of big settlement agreement. So we have the staff, but special appropriations holds the funding for that. But, they are essentially part of my staff. And so I just want clarity. We'd love to just have that money since we have the staff. But I know that there are some other, I'm just trying to understand like some of the other components to that and why that isn't the case, given that we have the staff. And, I manage the staff, but I don't manage the funds. Just.
That's a good question, right? Why is that, right?
So I think
don't
to
know.
add to that,
Whoever.
I think we share in the administration of those funds. So, and part of it is managed. The programmatic piece is managed through the mayor's office, and then the PSEP portion, the positions are managed by OEHR. So there's a component that you have the staff and you're managing part of it, but then OMF Grants Management Division is also.
And so it's the COCO that actually is managed by finance, right?
So the programmatic piece is in the mayor's office, managing the budget and tracking the ongoing expenses, and any other administrative unrelated to the HR piece of it is managed by the Grants Management Division. So don't take all the money.
No, but I just think for, like, just in terms of the sort of, sometimes it gets cumbersome, and I think not necessarily anything that you're doing, but it can be a little clunky when we have the staff, but not really the program, if that makes sense.
It
and
does.
so I want to support it, right? Absolutely.
I don't disagree, and
And so I'm
disagree,
not
and
criticizing, I just.
Oh, yeah, no. And
So not you.
I would certainly be open to your thoughts and ideas on that. And I would add it's even clunkier and more cumbersome than perhaps you realize, because it's also micromanaged by the federal court. And so there's lots of people who participate and have an interest in this particular aspect of police accountability.
Further discussion,
But
but
if there's a way to, if you want to pitch us on a different idea, I'm very open-minded.
Okay, then we'll move on to the charter review.
Yay.
Afternoon, Mayor, council members. I'm Shoshana Oppenheim. I'm from the Office of Management and Finance. I'm in the Office of the CAO. I'm here to talk to you about the Charter Commission. I'm happy to go through my talking points, or if you have any questions, we can start there. But this package funds staffing and outreach for the commission. The code, as I'm sure you're well aware, mandates that from time to time, but at least every 10 years, that we review and recommend amendments to the charter. This decision package represents the importance we place on supporting the work of the commission and hearing from the community. City Council has heard the community and the public's call for an honest and progressive conversation about our form of government, and we developed this proposal to provide this council with the time to consider the issues involved in the conversation and to support a sincere community engagement process so that the commission and this council can hear from the community about what governance in the future should look like, how to increase elected representation, and how we should manage Portland's government in the future.
But just to be clear, by charter, we can't limit the Charter Commission's ability to review anything, so that would be expected that the Charter Commission will want to consider that, but there are also other things that community members or we may ask them to discuss.
Absolutely. You can make recommendations on what you would like, and then they will make their own work plan determining what issues they would like to look at. So if you have ideas that you would like us to bring to the Charter Commission, we can ensure that those are in the work plan.
I just think if we frame it that this is why we're putting the Charter Review Commission together, that we are limiting the public's vision about what's possible with the Charter Review Commission. So I would take any reference out about the form of government because A, we don't get to tell them what they should look at, and B, I think it creates a more open process if we just bring really smart people together and give them 2 years to actually look any place they want to look. So I would greatly appreciate us not trying to frame it in a way where it appears that we're trying to direct the actions of the commission.
In the past, the city attorney has made recommendations about various areas where the charter was a hindrance to addressing the council's priorities. I think that we all would agree that recently, with the passing of Commissioner Fish, the filling of the vacancy for his position, waiting to the new election, there might have been another way that we would like to address vacancies in the future commissions. So we can bring those ideas to the Charter Commission and allow them. Absolutely.
Excuse me. Absolutely. We can bring ideas to them, but again, we don't get to frame why we're putting them together, right? And so words are really powerful. So if people think we're recruiting them to look at the form of government, then there'll be some people that will self-select out because they have no interest in that. My point is, you're absolutely right. We can ask them anything, but when you frame the whole Charter Review Commission around a certain subject, then you limit our ability to have the commission do anything and everything that they think they need to do. So
Point well taken.
I absolutely agree with you.
Yeah.
I'll certainly be in there telling them the things I think I want them to work on, but I would not frame it that way when I'm recruiting people to participate.
Point well taken. I think that my intention was just to give the landscape of the various issues that could be addressed by the Charter Commission, your input and ideas of areas where you've had challenges with the Charter. We can definitely continue to make a list and include those as recommendations for their work plan. Ideas for their work plan. This request is for $367,064 in FY 2021, with an expectation that the work would continue over into 21-22 with an additional request. We imagine that the work plan would be about probably 18 to 24 months on this work. We want to make sure that there's enough time, enough lead time for this council to appoint a the members of the Charter Commission before December. It is the members of the existing council plus the council member that'll be joining you after the election is resolved that will make the decision on who is on the Charter Commission. So, any questions? Thank you.
So several years ago, I had suggested that we put 50,000 ongoing into the budget for the Charter Commission, because that way we wouldn't have to be doing a big dollop at certain times. So that's just something for you all who are going to continue on to consider as to when might be a good time to do that. I mean, clearly 500,000 isn't enough to do the whole thing either. If we're going to do robust outreach, which, as was mentioned, there are some really meaty problems to look at, and we don't want to skimp on outreach. And when we did the Community Connect process under Mayor Potter, there was a huge amount of investment in staff and resources to get community members to participate. And so that's why it's really important, I believe, for the Charter Commission to be funded by the council and to include a robust amount of community outreach rather than one group or another telling us what we need to do.
I totally support that. I'm curious as to the $367,046. That is a very exact amount. Was there a magic to that?
Thank you for the question, Commissioner. I took it over. I took the total budget of 800,000+ and divided by the months and kind of estimated a work plan. So it was really just breaking it down for the months that the Charter Commission would be impaneled for this fiscal year versus next fiscal year.
All right, thanks. And while you're there, what's the magic number with the council transition? What is anticipated there?
We'll have someone else up to answer those questions.
Okay.
And here comes somebody.
And
Here comes somebody else.
Thanks, Shoshana.
Thank you.
this is what makes special appropriations special. It's like we have representatives from across the city to cover special appropriations.
Ben Smith, Office of Management and Finance. So the request that was in special appropriations was for $111,000 to cover the transition for Commissioner Fritz's office. We subsequently pulled that request, and there's savings in Commissioner Fish's current budget to cover that, plus the transition cost for his office. And then next year, once we see what happens in the May election, we will potentially coming back for dollars for Wheeler's office and Commissioner Udaly.
Thank you.
Yeah, my staff, led by Tim Crail, has routinely sent tens of thousands of dollars back to the general fund, so we're expecting to be able to cover this within our current year budget.
Excellent.
And I just want to note, I've had discussions with the budget office about trying to capture some of those savings from the council budgets to set up more of a permanent funding source for when these transitions happen. To take those, similar to what you were mentioning, Commissioner Fritz, for the charter review, having those funds available so they're not becoming a new request each time. When we want to establish a level of service for each transition and making sure those funding dollars are there.
I'm not sure I actually support that, because half of the money that we give back goes to major maintenance. So I'm not sure that I would propose portioning off maybe the part that doesn't go to major maintenance from the council's leftovers. So just throw that into the mix for your future considerations.
Sounds good.
And before you leave, maybe you're the one that can tell me about the Peninsula Drainage District?
Someone else.
Someone else. There are people back there waving at me. What's this about?
And they're coming up next.
And they're coming up next. Man, it's a great segue. You just gave me that lull, and here they come.
Did have a handout here that just might help too.
And we have the whole council.
Huh?
Yeah, we
The
do.
whole drainage
All of us.
council.
Good afternoon, Mayor and councilors. I am Peggy Kaufman Yates. I am the Executive Director of the Peninsula Drainage District. And I have here with me 3 of our Peninsula Drainage District board members, which include Jeff Noodleman from Harsh Industries, Andy Catugna from Metro, and also James, I'm having a brain, Allison from the city of Portland.
Thank you.
And so I wanted to also address that Casey Short is our budget director, so I've asked him to attend as well. I wanted to, first of all, thank you for your budget staff and the previous contributions that have been made for the Peninsula Drainage District. And then I want to just take a minute and have you take a look. Peninsula Drainage District doesn't mean a lot to a lot of people when they first hear it, but I want to tell you it represents one of 4 districts that represent the greatest, as far as I'm concerned, and I think it's true, one of the most important infrastructure systems in the city of Portland. It's kind of a hidden giant, but it is the system that protects us from flood and also keeps our airport, our industrial land. It also keeps the PIR and the golf course dry. That whole system operates. Pen 1, as you can see, to the north, the boundary is the Columbia River. To the east is Denver Boulevard. To the south is the Columbia Slough. And to the west is the BN and the BNSF and the UP Railroad system. So this area, just to, and as you'll see from that, you can notice where the golf course is and the PIR system is located. In the bottom, just to kind of provide a reference, shows the length of the entire districts. There's actually 4 districts that consist of this levee protection and flood protection and safety system. Our budget request is associated with maintaining our tow drain system, which tow drain systems are actually what keeps the levee dry, the levee itself, so it doesn't crumble. If there's too much moisture in the levee system, it actually will not blow out on the water side, but blow out on the dry side. So that maintaining those tow drains that have been in place forever is a critical system. We also are working toward getting a drainage master plan, which provides us an idea of how to modernize the existing system, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. And then it also to support our district administration, which incorporates making sure we have electricity for the pump that sits out at PIR that keeps that whole area dry, and some staff costs, and also helps to support our houseless outreach that goes on, that we conduct regularly, because we have a lot of individuals that will build homes on the levee, and then there's areas where there's people will actually settle in low-lying area, and we have a system in place to, we work with Cascadia Behavioral Health, and we go out and meet with those individuals, talk about the concern, especially in high water area, that they need to move and to evacuate, et cetera. So it's a number of things we do. Just a very quick background. Peninsula Drainage District was established in 1917. It was established for an agricultural industry and some other industry, but the levee system was put in place to protect and allow people to produce ag. Obviously, that was in 1917. We are now over 100 years past that, and we're working with the same system with some improvements over the years with help from the Corps of Engineers, but we are in the process of trying to modernize the entire system. Pen 1, I will use Pen 1 because that's what we tend to use, is one of the lowest lying pieces of property in the system. And also, just as a reference, it is in Pen 1 where we had the levee blowout and caused the Vanport flood in 1948, sorry, which resulted in, well, it seems a long time ago, but it's not that long when you think about it, which caused 15 deaths and had to relocate thousands of people. And also represented, which I think is important for all of us, is a recognition that was the most diverse community in the state of Oregon at the time that was completely wiped out within hours. That is also the most vulnerable area of the entire drainage system from the west border all the way to the east in the Sandy River. Also, one of the reasons I'm here at the City of Portland, the City of Portland represents 76% of the land within that district. There's other pockets throughout, but they're the largest landowner. And another thing that I think is important, which feeds into the work that we are doing now, is in 2013, the Corps of Engineers arrived at our doorstep and said that historically, they've given us a 10-year window for maintaining the system and get certification, so we then allow FEMA and get flood insurance. They showed up in 2013 and said, we're not certifying you anymore until you initiate some work. That was a result of Katrina and the damage that was done, and that this was an urban levee system, and these urban levee systems had suddenly, after Hurricane Katrina, became a bigger and more concerned and higher risk. So they went through that process. That forced us, as Penn 1, to go through to initiate investigation and assessments to make sure that we are moving on the right path to getting that certification, because the certification then impacts FEMA and the money that's available for FEMA and our flood maps, which impacts all of us. Our primary revenue source is our assessments. It's not property tax, but it's assessment of land in the area within the boundaries. And those assessments have, as I said, 76% is the City of Portland, 12% is the Port, 4% is Metro, and then there's other property owners within the district. The other thing that has caused us short revenue income is because of the structure of our taxing system in the state of Oregon. It limits us and our ability to collect revenues. So we have been working on in a more constrained budget every year. One thing that is positive, and I don't want to sound like a naysayer, this money will help us to bridge a process that the legislature in 2019 passed Senate Bill 431, which recognized the importance of this levee system to the state of Oregon, that it protects jobs, it protects your secondary water source, it protects our airport, et cetera, and thousands of homeowners. And so they set up the process for establishing a new government structure, which begins, our first board meeting is going to be May 4th, which is the beginning of that new district, which over time will allow us to, the existing 4 districts that make up the system will dissolve, and we'll have a new district. That new district will be up and running in full bore once we have a revenue source that supports it. So it's a new revenue
And what year do
structure.
you expect that to happen?
I'm thinking, I'm managing expectations. I'm thinking 2024. It may be sooner. As soon as we set up, once that board meets, getting up to speed on the system itself. We have 17 board members. Some will have experience with this, some won't. So we're going to need to get them up to speed and then go through a process of starting to identify the costs. We have a good handle of our operating costs, but asset management, level of service, geographic distribution, et cetera, needs to be identified as we move forward to make sure that once we set up a rate, it's, as we all know, once it's set up, it's hard to make changes. So we want to get it right the first time.
And are you anticipating that the rate that you'll set up will make it a self-funded system?
Correct.
And so we can anticipate not coming back to the general fund after this transition happens.
That would be my anticipation, correct?
Mine
I can't-
too.
Yeah. Four governing boards for 4 districts.
All independent.
All independent. I am the executive director for 4 boards. And, but all of the operations and maintenance and administration, yeah. Administration is handled through the Multnomah County Drainage District, which is the larger of the
So are the
districts.
city requests for all 4 districts or just this one?
Just this one. That's a
Does-
standalone. I can't mix funds. They're standalone districts.
The request for others, just other budget sessions?
No. You mean asking for other? No, we do not anticipate it.
Why is this one?
Yeah, why'd
needing
we
money?
stop paying general fund, right?
Couple of reasons. One of the major reasons is that this is 76% owned by the city. There is a tremendous amount of compression associated with it. And also as parkland, it has less value. So our revenue source from that district is extremely limited.
Andy, am I correct in remembering that Metro owns the Vanport wetlands? The port owns it.
Port owns the
Thank you.
wetlands, Metro owns the expo.
Yeah.
I see.
Yeah, some of these things just amaze you, like, how did we end up in this place?
I'd just like to talk about the risk of not funding, just so everyone's aware. As I said, we have a constrained revenue source. It impacts even the electricity of running those pumps. If we have a high, wet, rainy year, it can impact the ability for us to pump water out of that PIR area. And if you can't pump the water out of the PIR area, it impacts the infrastructure underneath that raceway, as well as the golf course. We are also want to maintain the path for FEMA accreditation, because otherwise we're going to have to the property needs to be readdressed for floodplain. We also have a pump station that's over 70 years old that is kind of creaky. And also, our concern with the potential consequences of insolvency has to do with, does the city have to take this over? I don't know. I don't have the answers. We have also, with this new legislation, if we lose one of our 4 districts, it could impact the ability to make that happen. And we have also built a strong relationship with the Army Corps of Engineers. I don't know if you've heard of those studies, but the study that's currently in place is the Corps has come through with $3 million to come in and evaluate our entire system and identify what the work that needs to be done. If we remain in that channel and system, we will get 65% of the improvements paid for by the government, and that's 65% of construction and 50% of the engineering and design. So, all these pieces are all being held together very thinly, and so.
Great. Do you have a question in Metro and Port of Portland for funds as well?
2 things. Port of Portland is already making a contribution. There's an additional pump on the property, and they help to maintain and fund that particular pump that supports the Vanport wetlands. And Metro has miraculously not been undergoing any compression. So we have not gone to them and only a part of their property is in the district itself. So.
This map is not complete. Metro is not part of your district, is that what you're saying?
No, part of the Metro, the Expo Center is, but there's portions of it that are not in the district. That map may not reflect it well, but yeah.
Adding to the explanation of why are we here, to come to you to help pay for this, and the reason is because of how the revenue system is structured under state law. the amount that we ask you to pay towards the operation of the system is calculated based upon acreage and impervious surface, but it's collected through the property tax system. And when the compression effects of property taxes kick in, the bill on the park-related land, which is the golf course and the racetrack, is essentially cut in half. You get a bill for $2 million, but it's cut in half because of compression. That doesn't happen on the commercially valued land, either Metro's Expo or the private properties. They're not under compression. They're paying the bill that they would otherwise get. The parklands are paying essentially half the bill because of compression. That's why the new district is so important. We'd like to get out of the property tax system and levy what would be a utility fee like a utility fee. A utility fee would be based upon measures like acreage and impervious surface and not get compressed under the property taxes. Just simply everyone pays their share based upon the factors that go into that utility fee. So the utility fee is the way to make sure each district is self-supporting and pays for their operation based upon their share of the usage of the system, and remove ourselves from the property tax system or this kind of request to supplement what's essentially a bill that's been cut in half.
So I know that Parks has been involved in these discussions. I am assuming Environmental Services as well. I know from time to time the Mayor's office has. Who's the lead for the city in these discussions?
I've been working directly with Tom Reinhardt, but he's also been working, Michael Jordan is actively involved, and so is our park staff as well. We have been...
The intention is to put the cost onto the utility bills?
The intention is to create a utility-type fee. That'll be the job of this new board once it's formed, is to figure out how that utility-type fee gets structured.
And only the landowners within the district would pay it?
Correct.
People, yeah, the people that are benefiting from it will be the ones that will be paying it. And it could be a utility fee. The beauty with this new legislation is it provides us much more flexibility of raising funds, which we've just been extremely limited by statute.
And I know there are a few residences in the East Columbia neighborhood and elsewhere. Are the residents involved in the discussions as well? Who's the community representatives?
We are working with Bridgeton Neighborhood Association, the East Columbia Neighborhood Association, and there are others that I may not be in mind, but staff, we have a very active outreach staff working in that in the communities, not only about the district itself, but also as it relates to the Corps of Engineers work and proposed.
All right, so not to shut down a good conversation, this has definitely whetted our appetite, and we'll have follow-ups, but there's at least 3 more presentations, and I want to make sure we respect everybody by hearing them as well. Peggy, thank you. This is very good.
Thank you.
I'm learning a lot just by listening, so thank you. And we'll probably have follow-up questions for you as we get into the budget process.
That's fine. And thank you for listening. And again, I appreciate the City of Portland's responsiveness to this.
And
through this whole
is this the first funding request you've made of the city council?
We also had a funding request that came through. You passed an ordinance for, you had a fall bump that you gave us some monies for, but.
We've funded multiple things over time.
I'm sorry?
We've funded multiple things over time.
Oh, yeah, I'm just making sure that this is not an expectation, just as an ongoing funding request that we somehow had committed to 20 years ago, and we keep doing it.
It kind of is an ongoing obligation since we're landowners and since obviously the levy has to be maintained and get recertified.
So I think the question is how we do it, right? Not if we do it this way, but how we do it.
So, Mr. Mayor, council members, advisors, you said you learned a lot. I've been on the board 10 years, and I'm still learning. This is not your basic, water finds a way, and it's taken a long time to figure out this 100-year-old entity to figure it all out. So I appreciate all your time here, and we all will keep learning together as well.
And we appreciate your service. We know it's not for the high paycheck, so thank you. Thanks a lot. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting.
We'll have Pua come up now.
What's that? That might be too easy.
Especially if it's coming out of your mind.
Welcome. Thank you for being here. Thanks for being here today. We appreciate it.
Go rap, is your button on?
Now it is.
Hi, who are you?
I am Diego Hernandez, Coalition Director for Portland United Against Hate. It's good to be part of a functioning government. Okay. So I'm here to bring about this proposal to you all, but first I want to touch base a little bit about the history of PUA. PUA started off as a coalition housed within the city of Portland. It's actually been only less than a year, 6 months plus, that we've been an independent organization outside of the city. But prior to that, we had a full-time staff on top of other resources and supports. And with that, we were able to, I'm just going to read off some of the outcomes that we had in the previous year. We held 195 trainings for 5,260 people. We also engaged 17,264 people in 11 languages, as well as of October 31st, 2019, we had 251 reported hate incidents. And just, for those who may not be aware of what PUA is, we are a coalition of community-based organizations, city and government partners, on top of other individuals who want to join as part of a movement to try to end hate in the city of Portland. We also are a sub-grantee to organizations that focus on prevention, but also response, and then our tracking tool, reporthatepdx.com, where we collect the data. That tool came about from the request of City Council. And we are here in large part through direction from you all for one, moving towards being an independent organization and getting more legs under ourselves so that we can do this work well. And then two, also to figure out strategies in a way that we can inform and be direct with you all without needing to hold back. And three, to make sure that we are more inclusive, to make sure that we are more intentional. We have a plan to make sure that we hit up immigrant and refugee organizations more, that we have a plan to make sure that we have representation from Black community organizations. So with that, I'm glad that we are starting to track measuring outcomes, because that's what we're all about. So just to give you all some of the measures that we are going to be tracking with hopefully your support. We're going to track how many number of trainings we're doing, how many people were trained, number of people reached and engaged, number of languages we're doing these services in, number of incidents that we have, and also the quarterly reports that were asked of us to provide as well. And how many organizations are part of our steering committee, which is kind of like our board of directors. And we have right now 31 community-based organizations as part of our steering committee, 82 plus. We have some more joined in. That's part of the coalition, our collective efforts. We meet quarterly. The board or the steering committee meets once a month, and actually today they're meeting currently right now. So what is our request about? Like I said, we are in the process of still trying to get our foundation as an independent organization. It's been less than 6 months, or it's been less than a year, but we've made some really great, not only thanks to you all support, some great movement forward. We've been able already to raise close to $120,000 on top of the city funding. We have proposals in currently with Multnomah County to expand services outside of the city of Portland into outer east Multnomah County. where there are a lot more concentration in communities of color as well, and other diverse and marginalized communities. And we are working not only on the implementation of SB 577, which is the hate crimes bill, but also future sources of funding that would go for the direct service component, the survivor services component, and then hopefully some of the prevention. And the questions that we ask that is leading this effort is, what is the responsibility of the state when it comes to hate in our communities? What is the responsibility of the counties? What is the responsibility of the city? And we think that everybody has a role to play in combating white supremacy, white nationalism, hate, racism, xenophobia, et cetera, in our communities. And we just want to do it in a very intentional way where governments is working with community partner organizations, and we're figuring out best practices and solutions. So I know that I'm talking a lot, but I, just to wrap up and have one of our executive committee members close here, we aren't, our request isn't for more than what we've asked for in the past. We want to continue to fund 10 to 15 groups in the coming year to continue to do the prevention, the tracking, the response work that we do, and give us a little bit more time to really start to build that foundation of an organization. Somebody who has started a nonprofit before, it takes longer than a year to get something really solid. So we want to make sure that your investments in the past and your continual investments are really going to work well. And that's why we're here to ask for continual funding so that we can really lay a really solid foundation with multiple tentacles of support elsewhere so that we could do this right and we could do it well. And folks feel like there's not only data out there that we can use, but also a response mechanism that they can go to for support.
Thank you, Representative. Before you turn it over, I just want to say to you that the last budget cycle, it had been 2 years that we had funded at this level. And when the Rabbi was here last year during budget time, there was a commitment made that you would not be coming back for the same amount of money again because you were actually going out to raise additional money. Because I personally have a hard time with ongoing one-time funding that ends up lasting one's lifetime. And the last time when the Rabbi was here, I was very concerned that we had not identified African-American groups because they also are suffering from hate crimes and are not, have not gotten the level of support that I've seen other communities get over the years that Portland United Against Hate has been around. And so I'm not hearing that there is a plan to actually, you say give us another year, but I gave you another year last year. And so what's different this year that I could say, okay, based on the conversation we had during budget time last year, this year, here's where we're investing, and this is why we need some additional city dollars. And so I just want you to know, nothing against your organization, but I asked everybody who gets one-time money and says, just one more time, one more time, one more time. Got a few of those coming up. And if nothing is different, then I don't know why I would invest once again in the same work that is having some good outcomes, but not addressing some of the issues that I'm concerned about.
Commissioner Hersey, it's an excellent question, and why don't we do this before we all jump in with questions? Why don't we let you go ahead and finish your presentation, and maybe you could also address that broader question in your concluding remarks.
No, it's going to go back to Representative, but you go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize.
Yeah, I believe that the funding used to be a lot higher. It was $500,000 plus in resources that pool was getting, plus it had the city staff supporting the work. Let me just be very transparent. When I started in August and hired by the steering committee, that was the first transitionary process of the organization becoming independent. And in that process, I'm subcontracted with a very limited budget where you wouldn't even be able to afford a .3 city employee with that amount of money. But that's what you all have, I think, provided. And on top of other monies that we've leveraged on civic dialogues, we've been able to have capacity to do the staffing required to lead the management of the organization, the programming of the organization, and the administrative components to the data tracking and the mechanism of our partnership with the Coalition Communities of Color to make sure that our data sets are working well, or that our data tool is working well. So I think we've been able to stretch in such a short period of time the resources, but we've also been able to lay out a really concrete solution. We are finalizing our governance structure. So there's a lot of work that I could talk about that we've done. And I am going to reassure you, and we've said it explicitly not only here, but in our progress report a few months ago, that our intent is that in our next funding cycle that we have those focused priorities, including Black and African American communities, and including immigrant and refugee communities. This time around, we had Volos Workers' Rights Project enter the granting funding cycle. We've also had Resolutions Northwest with our work in schools with the increase of hate incidents in schools, particularly recently with the coronavirus components to what's happening in our society. And so it's different from what we've asked for. We're not asking for the full amount that we used to ask for. It's much less. And we've also said, hey, you're going to give us this, but we're going to match it. Not only with capacity, but also with other funders. So it is our intent. And I wish I could have said, hey, it's been 6 months, 7 months, and guess what? I found funding already in the county and the state. And I wish I could have been here to tell you all that in such a short period of time. I'm trying to do it sooner than anybody else would do it, to be honest.
I appreciate the honesty, but I like to remind people of the promises that they've made in the past and try to hold people to their own words. So appreciate your explanation. Thank you.
Thanks, Mayor and Commissioners. But I would agree with Diego. This is an important moment for Portland United Against Hate, where we are. And I don't think we are coming here sort of seeking funding just for our own survival. We see the city of Portland as an important partner in the work that we do, just like we see all the partners that we are engaging with that Diego talked about, the expansions that we've made. And that really is helping us look at how do we expand the capacity of the coalition itself, as well as the members that we're working to do outreach to, as Diego talked about, and some of those members of those communities that you're talking about, Commissioner Hardesty. So really, the piece that I wanted to bring forward was really where we are headed strategically as we talk about growing as a coalition, expanding geographically. We are continuing to look at building the capacity of the member organizations, those frontline communities that are experiencing hate and discrimination. So that work will always be center of what we do as a coalition. We'll continue to, again, as those frontline communities are experiencing hate, discrimination, and harassment in our communities, we'll continue our work around rapid response as a coalition, working to make sure that as these communities are experiencing these incidents, that we are having ways to respond to that. As you know, the Report Hate PDX tracking tool, we're working to also expand and make sure that we are getting it beyond just the point of contact organizations that are part of the coalition out publicly, so that we are gathering as much data as we can. And then the piece I think that is on the forefront for us right now as we're expanding is also looking at that data, what we know from our frontline communities, to help inform policy work. And that can take a lot of forms. I think it's the work that is rooted in some of the grants that we're getting right now, as well as the work that we're doing with some of our other partners. So that's where we're headed as a coalition in the coming months, and why we see our partnership with you as an important part of that as we continue to move forward and grow. So we're happy to entertain further questions.
I'll just throw my 2 cents out there. Commissioner Hardesty's good comments notwithstanding, we would be doing this work if you weren't.
Yes.
So we would be paying for it. But I'd rather you do it because you work directly with and have the relationships with the frontline communities. And therefore, I think there's more credibility. And in the event of a situation like what we just saw in Hillsborough, where we need to activate quickly. We don't have a lot of time to build trust at the community level. We need trusted proxies in the community making those direct contacts, providing information, providing reassurances, and giving people accurate information. And so it's not quite as fast as we would have liked, the path to self-sufficiency, but the way I'm hearing it is we just got $120,000 in leverage that we didn't have last year for something that we're going to do anyway. So I know your hearts are in the right place, your heads are in the right place. Representative, I know you're working tirelessly on this, and I really appreciate it.
Mayor.
Commissioner Udaley.
I feel similarly to the mayor. I'm really proud of the work that PUA has done. I had concerns early on just because of how rapidly the group came together, how complex the programming was, and how ambitious the project was. But my fears proved unfounded, and the coalition has leveraged these city dollars to provide much needed support to targeted communities. PUA originally lived in Civic Life, and Civic Life, formerly ONI, was a founding member. But as the project progressed, it was agreed it would be more appropriate to be an independent organization. I supported that move, but I also support some kind of continued funding for PUA. I believe if this isn't work the city can effectively do itself, that we have an obligation to continue funding these efforts. I think the mayor shared some legit reasons why we may not be the best service deliverers, messengers. But we absolutely benefit from the work you're doing. I consider PUA a valuable partner in our effort to continue confronting hate. So I'm really happy to support this request.
Yeah, I didn't get it.
How many years have we been funding this program? How many years?
Three, I think.
This would be the fourth year?
This will be the
right?
fourth,
Yeah.
this budget cycle, yes.
Yeah. But we've decreased resources because we no longer staff PUA.
Can I
think-
just comment also is East Portland Action Plan supports them as signed on with PUA. We actually, because we're almost all volunteers, we actually have a volunteer who's committed to their steering committee to work that way. So that group as a whole body supports it as well as providing volunteer support.
Yeah, I don't think there's any question that we know this work is desperately needed. I think the question is whether it's desperately needed at the community level, or whether government should be the funder or the primary funder, whether or not this should be really a community nonprofit organization. And so the sad thing is I have a very long memory, so anytime I actually have a conversation about something, I actually remember it over the years and remember whether or not it's actually changing or not. So it's always fascinating. I love the premise behind this program, always have. I love the fact that the rabbi, who's your co-facilitator in this effort, first rabbi I met that cursed, right, made me blush, but she's absolutely very clear about the vision and the work that is being done. Again, from the very beginning, I think this is excellent work, but I also think that more work needs to be done to engage the African American community, and I will continue to say that as long as we keep putting city money in it. I will continue to say that we're missing people that desperately need this kind of service. And so when we get to the budget part, we'll be asking those kind of questions again. But my other question, seriously, is really around what has been the data around who is reporting hate crimes and what happens after they report it to you?
So, and we will be following up with our quarterly reports with some of that information. But we did have, hopefully it's in your packet, some supplemental questions that try to answer it, like how does the tool work, what it does and what it does not. There's several ways folks can report. Some of them could be navigated through a community-based organization in which is providing a direct service and then deciding, for example, if they're a staffer with a panel that they're going to go in and report an incident with the survivor/victim with them. And that's one way that data could be entered. The other way is independently in the community. Somebody could have faced an incident or seen an incident, go on to our website and fill out our reporting mechanism. We went through a community process to figure out what kind of questions to ask and how that data should be shared and so it is optional, right? And many of these questions are optional. So in terms of identifiers, we leave it up for the folks to self-identify themselves and how they want their data to be shared out. So that's that part. In terms of the response and services, like I mentioned, that's why we have grants to community-based organizations, not only to do the education, prevention, and the collective efforts to change stuff so we can end this, but it's also so that we could do the direct service component as well. And if they are doing the direct service component as well, then they're reporting that into our system. And we've known right now, like, for example, one of our busiest partners in terms of hate incidents is Apano, with a lot of the growing xenophobia, particularly amongst the API community on the coronavirus.
Good.
Being
Sure.
the oldest person here, been around almost too long, but I remember when I was on the Human Rights Commission, that was the work that we were doing as a city commission, the city-county commission. Mountain County and City co-funded our program. We had.
Oh, right, it was the City Council Human Rights Commission, right? Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And I think we were one of the instigators for passing the hate crime bill in the state level, because after what happened to, what's her name, Ethiopian gentleman.
Great, and I'll put an offer on the table as well, because we're also trying to coordinate with the J District, Apano, and others on how to respond to COVID-19 and some of the implications for the community. And I think it behooves us, if we're going to have this kind of almost contractual relationship, that we communicate well so that we're on the same page, we're saying the same things. And to be honest, to have people in the community know that we are specifically engaged in a relationship in the community. I know, for example, you're engaged in transgender rights and have provided grants in that regard, and I'm very pleased to see that. But by the same token, then I hear from people in that community that we've done nothing.
Right.
And so there's not a connection back to us being full partners, full-throated, supportive partners of the work you do in the community. And so I think there's ways for us to collaborate more thoughtfully going forward as well.
Frankly, Mayor, yeah, we had a meeting with your office, and I think that we also came to that understanding that that's something as we, as you push away for your independence, you have to try to figure out, oh, wait a minute, how does that relationship work still, right?
We don't want it to be seen as indifference.
Yeah, exactly,
right?
yeah, and we don't want to push too far away so that we
Or
lose that
transactional.
important partnership with all of our partners. And so I think it's something that we're continuing to work to figure out, and I think it benefits both of us to have that relationship, that partnership.
Thank you.
And I was just going to say, the more we talk about frontline communities, I get very nervous that everybody says they're working with frontline communities, and I approve it, show me, right? It's like, that's becoming the new buzzword, right? Frontline communities. So it's going to take more than just telling us, right? we're going to need contracts, and we're going to need to know how other agencies are also working with frontline communities, because I could really see a day where, like, we're funding the same 5 organizations from 10 different bureaus, and nobody knows that they're actually already frontline communities who are getting paid. We don't have any worries about that today, but I see a scenario where that would be possible, because we're actually not identifying what does that really mean and what are those community groups, so that we know exactly who we're talking about. But we've got more work to do around that. Thank you.
Thank you very much for being here. We appreciate it.
Thank you for surviving the legislature.
Yeah, that was.
He hasn't yet. He has to go. Don't you have to go back? Or
We might have to go for a special session.
Yeah.
Sorry about the state government, y'all.
Working on him about our bill. I said, well, if you go to a special session, you can't leave unless we pass our bill, right?
We want our bill.
We
Yeah, a lot of bills.
I wanted to do a quick time check. We are over time, but we have 3 more presentations that we are hoping to hear, and I believe at least for 2 of them, there are community members that came to speak about Rose Festival and Equity Corp's Coalition. And then there's also a RAC proposal. So I wanted to be sure that council's okay with staying a little bit longer, particularly for the
Yeah,
folks that
why
came here.
why don't we do our
great.
citizens first, community representatives first, and then we'll get to city staffers if that's okay.
Okay, great. Is somebody here from the Rose Festival?
The Rose Festival, excellent. Yeah,
I think while they're coming up, though, I just want to address us giving money to multiple organizations. We'll be able to report back to you with our new system if we're doing that. And
That's a promise I'm going to hold you to. Thank you.
I will not leave the city until this grant management system is in place.
Okay, it's on the record, right?
Yeah,
That's my
on the
promise to you.
record. There it
I've
is.
been working on it for well over a year.
I'm feeling you. I appreciate you.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Mayor and distinguished commissioners and advisors. My name is Jeff Curtis. I'm the CEO of the Rose Festival Foundation. Appreciate the opportunity to be in front of you today and to talk about the budget and specifically the Rose Festival Foundation's request for $100,000 of ongoing funding. I'd love to provide some context, a little history, and some facts as the mayor presents his budget in the coming weeks that this is considered. Most of you know, or we know, that Rose Festival has been around since 1907, a completely independent not-for-profit, relies on the folks of the community to come and support our events, and the corporate community to sponsor our events, and the old hard work of volunteerism to exist. And very proud of that and with the work that we do on a year-round basis, and do that as a nonprofit. Specifically, some facts that we engage over 136 individual schools, representing over 10,000 kids that get a chance to be part of a festival experience, most notably in our parades. Engage over 200 not-for-profits, giving them a platform to, whether it be donated tickets or a chance to be in the parade or some experiences that no other foundation can offer. And we create an experience for our citizens in our community of bringing people together, and especially in these times. And we do that as the greatest beneficiary as a nonprofit is the city itself is the greatest beneficiary with its economic impact and social value. And I do want to talk about social value because I think that's really important today. Money is money, but also the social value of a festival. And also what's most notable in these facts is that just over 10% of 1 million plus people that engage our festival, just only about 10% actually pay, meaning about 90% of our events are people that come do it for free, which is the parades themselves. And I think that's a notable fact, and that's important, that's good. As a nonprofit foundation, we want to deliver a gift to our citizens in our community, and doing so and make it free and accessible to all is part of what we try to do in the engagement of an entertainment experience. So some facts related to this $100,000 and some history. I think the difference here is that through the mayor's budget process, thank you to Mr. Whaler for past couple of years, it's been noted as one-time funding requests. We're asking for an ongoing funding request. That's the difference, and I'd love to provide some context of why, and then some facts about what $100,000 does. And it's not, $100,000 is not a significant amount, but it's the difference between a good year and a bad year for our nonprofit. It just represents about 2.7% of all our entire revenue. And for comparison purposes, it's the way costs are today to run a modern collaborative festival it helps pay for certain things that are important to, whether it be security, whether it be for your permits, or whether it be for some programming to allow nonprofits to be in your parade. But what's also notable is a healthy Rose Festival Foundation is more than just a community organization that can bring people together. It actually, by our partnership with the City of Portland as its official festival, it's a two-way street. Some examples is we pay roughly $185,000 in permit fees off the top. So our third largest expense, other than overhead and staffing to parade floats. We pay permit fees mainly to Portland Parks. And then there's that partnership with Rose Garden Store. At the end of May, we'll deliver another check, and this year for proceeds from merchandise at Washington Park that we operate on behalf of the city of about $140,000. That will, for the life of the Rose Garden Store, will contribute to about $1.5 million since we opened that store. And that's an example of the private partnership, public partnership that we have with the city of Portland. We're both winning on that side.
And that goes to Portland Parks and Recreation, right?
Correct. Correct. And then there's some history there. There's some history of what most people may not even remember, but the Rose Festival Foundation, when it was involved in major motorsports, Indy cars, spent over $1 million out at that racetrack. If you go out to Portland International Raceway, if you're sitting in the bleachers, or you walked around the paddock, and the paving was done by the Rose Festival, the bleachers were provided by the Rose Festival, and the Goodyear Bridge was provided by the Rose Festival, all gifted to parks as part of our event history. And most notably, most recently, we've invested in resurfacing the waterfront park on a regular basis. This doesn't come for free, and the risks are enormous every year. And so thus, this $100,000 provides a buffer. It certainly doesn't make or break a Rose Festival, but it's the absolute necessary buffer that we found are critical in our planning. And I should stop and acknowledge, the city does support the Rose Festival in other ways. When our ordinance comes together, it gives us police resources to put on the parade routes for security purposes. The city provides its resources at PBOT, specifically, a tremendous partnership that allows us with the city traffic engineer to make sure we can close streets safely. All those have costs in your normal city budgets. This is an ongoing conversation. But before, as I close, the difference today than the 3 or 4 years ago is it's really important to have a landscape of what we know versus what we don't know. And so the one-time funding is always an unknown. And when it's so late in our process, do we do certain things? And we always make the bet we need to do it, but that puts us at tremendous risk. So the budget request in front of you is for ongoing that gives us some known facts that we know it's part of, and it gives the city an investment as well of an ongoing basis. And those dollars are used for a variety of ways, but essentially to cover the basic overhead of this Rose Festival Foundation with specific tactics, whatever we could decide in partnership with the city any given year that those dollars should be directed towards, whether it be parade route or security or safety or any of those numbers. But it's the importance of knowing is critical in today's unknown world. So, thank you.
Great, thank you.
How many years have you had one-time funding?
We've had it's been off again under Mayor's leadership. It's been 2 consecutive years, and then it's been 4 out of the last 6.
So I also want to acknowledge, Commissioner Fish was a strong proponent of this funding. And if I could quote Commissioner Fish, he said, "This is our official festival." That's the way he felt about it. And I don't want to let it go that he was probably the primary reason why we made those investments.
Yeah.
I was happy to support it, of course, but I want to acknowledge Nick.
Thank you.
Mayor, I think just for the record, the Kids Parade is my favorite part, as you well know, of the Rose Festival. But I also want to say that I think it's really hard for a city council to commit to $100,000 ongoing money when we have a limited budget, when we will be facing an economic downturn. And I can support it on a one-time basis when we have the resources available, but I just want to be very transparent and say, I just could not in good conscience just say we would do this as compared to, say, fight hate or fight do something else on an ongoing basis. But lots of love for the children's parade, and I'm sure that this year we have some resources available, so it won't be an issue, but I would not want to have the fight to have to take it back in a bad year. I'd much rather you ask for it in a year that's a good year than us to have to strip it from you in a bad year. So just want to be very straightforward about that. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
The problem is that over the 12 years, this is my 12th budget, I've had to first of all, Commissioner Leonard requested it every year, and then since he's gone, I have requested it every year. And as is just evidenced by the fact that it didn't make it into the budget packages, it tends to drop off. And then as Jeff was saying, they need that certainty to be able to go out. They just renegotiated the contract for the Rose Garden store. So they could have renegotiated it so that they only sent us $40,000 instead of $100,000.
Well, we don't get it. It goes to Parks, so it's not the same as, I mean.
Parks
the
isn't
city
part
gets
of the city?
it. The city gets it. I get it. The city gets it, yes. But, I mean, it's
Parks
not the
is
same
also-
as it going back to the general fund, so.
It is general funded.
All right, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
Jeff, are you going to do a presentation when we come to council on the economic benefit of the Rose Festival?
Yeah, absolutely. I missed that, but it's roughly $50 million economic impact that we focus on an annual basis.
Yeah, I'd also be interested in transportation, telling us how much the revenues go up at the Smart Park String Rose Festival, because I would imagine that's fairly significant too.
Yeah, there's definitely an argument for return on investment. We get taxes, BLT, the higher your revenue, the higher your business tax, parking revenue. I'm sure there's also lots of costs.
Yeah, that's the thing that, we talk about one-time funding. I heard the commissioner speak at the other group prior. It's like, what's one time? It keeps coming and coming. What are you doing differently? And what's happening differently is my costs are going up 5, 10, 15%, including my parks permits go up 3%. So I can't keep up. It's a very tricky challenge.
This is the recurring theme right now, that our facilities are becoming too expensive for our community and our kind of anchor tenants and annual festivals to continue, and it's
hard.
We have to do something about that.
To be continued, we're going to lose some key people here, and I want to get through the presentation. Jeff, thank you. It's good seeing you.
Yeah, we're not going to solve it today.
Now we'll have
Who's
the
next?
equity core
Director
come up.
Kennard. Who? Sorry.
Waiting patiently. Equity core.
Very good. Thank you. Welcome.
So we still don't pay any money for the rent, the building they're in, right?
No, it's free.
And that's a sweetheart deal, yeah. I had no interest in more sweetheart deals like that.
Greetings.
Hi.
Thank you.
I think they concluded there was nothing else they could do.
There you go. Lost track of you.
Good afternoon. Thanks
Hello.
for the opportunity to be here before you all. So my name's Jordan Cunnings. I'm a staff attorney at Innovation Law Lab, where I direct the Universal Representation Program known as the Equity Corps. I'm here with Adriana Miranda, the Executive Director of CAUSA, and thank you for the opportunity to share with you today our request for funding. So I wanted to start by reminding the Council about this program's origins. So even before Trump's election, low-income Portlanders at risk of deportation struggled to access the legal representation they needed to fight their cases. Things have only worsened since then. As we know, 2017 brought the Muslim ban, increased ICE presence in Portland neighborhoods and courthouses, and the attempted decimation of humanitarian protections like DACA and asylum. In the summer of 2018, Portland stepped forward and responded by piloting a Universal Representation Fund, which became the Equity Corps program. So against this backdrop of increased enforcement and community fear, Equity Corps attorneys have assisted close to 500 Portlanders, providing stability and guidance in a time of great uncertainty. Portland's leadership in this universal representation fight has been essential to stopping deportations and keeping Portland families together. Representation improves someone's odds of winning their case by a factor of 5.5, and this reality has borne itself out in the program that we run here in Portland. So our program attorneys have won relief in immigration court for 65% of the folks that we represent in court, and that's compared to a 10% win rate for folks who are unrepresented. In the remaining 35% of cases, we've still stopped deportations by pursuing appeals and also leveraged capacity by relying on volunteer attorneys to take on those appeals. Equity Corps makes Portland's commitment to sanctuary a reality by providing these targeted and strategic legal services to the Portland community. We focus primarily on preventing deportations through court representation, but we also keep clients out of immigration detention, We assist with the filings of applications for asylum and other forms of relief. And we help clients seek work authorization, which allows people to have economic stability during the often years-long pendency of their immigration cases. We're currently made up of a formal partnership of 12 organizations. Dozens of other community-based organizations support our work by providing ancillary services and referring cases to the program. And there's a list of our partners in the handout. So I provided you with some numbers on how our program has provided services in the first 17 months. I won't go through all of them, but I wanted to emphasize that Portlanders make up over half of the program's current clients, even though we're not currently funded by the city of Portland. So it's about 52% of the people that we represent. This number includes over 40 unaccompanied minors. So these are children who sought safety in the United States alone and who would be forced to fight their cases in immigration court without representation, regardless of their age. So our youngest client, who's an unaccompanied minor, is 9 years old. And so he'd be doing his case alone if it weren't for our program. Many of these children attend Portland Public Schools and are actually referred to the program by Portland Public School employees. Another thing I wanted to highlight is our centralized intake system. So because we all work together collaboratively, we improve access, we increase efficiency, and we reduce client trauma by minimizing the need for folks to seek services from multiple providers and being turned away. Stopping deportations and providing access to legal counsel improves not only immigration case outcomes, but also overall family stability, which then minimizes the impact on the city's social service infrastructure. Equity Corps attorneys ensure that clients are connected to housing, mental health services, education, and other resources. So I've shared a couple anonymized stories with you all in the handout about folks who were able to stabilize their housing and other situations because of representation by an immigration lawyer. And we have dozens more examples that I'd be happy to share if it's of interest to any of the council members.
As Jordan mentioned, my name is Adriana Miranda, Executive Director of Causa, Oregon Immigrant Rights Organization. So we're here before you today in asking for a renewal of the $500,000 that would allow us to continue the representation of Portlanders facing deportation before our local immigration courts. As you all know, the attacks on immigrant communities are only increasing, and ICE is continuing to threaten sanctuary cities like sanctuary jurisdictions with subpoenas and raids, and immigration cases take roughly about 3 to 5 years to resolve. An ongoing commitment to sanctuary principles requires to fully protect our communities, and I just want to take a moment to really appreciate the statement that the City of Portland made on the subpoenas and really standing up for our immigrant communities, so thank you for that. Why a detention pilot? So with the increase in immigration in our state, we've seen a need to expand to represent detained Portlanders that are held in prison-like conditions in immigration detention. This $250,000 would help low-income Portland residents in immigration detention who have extremely limited options for legal representation. A single nonprofit serves the almost 1,600 people held at the Northwest Detention Center, and legal representation improves case outcomes for detained immigrants. The odds of releasing on bond are 4 times higher, and the chances of winning relief from removal increases almost 2 times. And the detention of parents causes family separation and significant instability. This pilot would work seamlessly with ongoing non-detained programs. And we just want to thank you for making universal representation part of Portland's commitment to our sanctuary status.
So I know we all share the values and understand that the program has had successes. I note on page 7 that you say Portlanders make up 52% of the people served. Who pays the rest of the funding?
We're currently funded by the state of Oregon.
And how much did you get from the state of Oregon?
We got $2 million for 2 years.
And 500 from the county.
500 from the county.
Which is, we're not currently funded by the county, but yes, we initially.
Because like Commissioner Hardesty, I have the memory that this was going to be seed money and then you would go after other money from elsewhere. And I'm concerned that if our people are only 52% of the funding of the people served, are we paying an equitable share of the funding?
So we're currently not receiving funding from the city of Portland. We're only receiving funding from the state. So the pilot was funded from October 2018 to October 2019.
So we didn't fund it last year?
No.
That's correct.
Yeah, so first of all, thank you for being here. I'm really proud of this program. You are doing exponentially more work with an amount of money that, initially I just was trying to figure out how do we stand up a small, program with a couple attorneys who could help dozens of people. And so it's incredible to me that you've been able to leverage that initial $500,000 into what you're doing now. My understanding of this was that you would come back in subsequent years and ask for less than $500,000. The ask last year came too late in the budget process for me to advance it. And so, no, we didn't fund it at all last year. So $750 spread over 2 years would still be a decrease in the annual funding. And again, I think it's another conversation about return on investment. I mean, I absolutely believe that we are morally obligated to fund this kind of work, but it's also stands to save us work and dollars in other arenas, because deportation destabilizes families. They're more likely to have to turn to public assistance. It impacts our local businesses and local economy. And probably the most concerning thing to me is that people are afraid to go to the hospital, to the courthouse, to schools. And that makes our whole community less safe when people aren't able to get the legal help they need, the medical care they need, especially right now in the face of a viral pandemic. So I know people don't like the recurring asks, but again, I think this is work that the city absolutely should be funding and that you're using our dollars really effectively.
Great, and I'm sorry to cut this off. I'm going to have to go pretty quickly.
Sorry.
Do we have one more presentation?
I think the final presentation is one that is being brought by Commissioner Udaly around
Okay.
RAC.
I want to thank you. We
Can I have
won't
just 30
Of
seconds?
course you can. We won't resolve it today, but this has been good information. We appreciate the
Thank
hard
you.
work you've been doing.
Yes, thank you for the hard work you've been doing, but I want to remind you, the last time we had this conversation, that we have other community members who are suffering abuse at the hands of their government, and they don't get legal representation. And so I am always very mindful when we set up a program to benefit one segment of our community, and other members who are having the same lived experience don't have access to funds. So I look forward to continuing the conversation during the budget talk, and thank you so much for being here. Appreciate what you're doing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you all so much.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for your patience as well.
Okay, who's here for RAC? Jan?
Hello.
So I guess I've been given an intro, right? Or do you want to start? I'm not sure where I'm supposed to jump in.
Thank you.
Name for the record, please, also.
It's Jeanne Kim, City Arts Manager, and I work for Office of Management and Finance.
Thank you.
Oh, I think I was given an intro because we're changing the request.
Yes.
Jointly. So, colleagues, I'd like to call your attention to the joint memo from myself and Tom Reinhardt. When OMF submitted its budget request for RAC in January, it did not include a cost of living increase, which RAC was previously contractually guaranteed. Instead, it proposed using the approximately $200,000 escalation to fund the cultural arts plan. This was done in part to address the austere general fund forecast we had at the time, but unfortunately did not include feedback from myself or my office. Since then, the City Arts Program team and my office have worked together to figure out a responsive funding plan that addresses both RAC and the city's larger arts funding priorities. That is the memo before you. It outlines a plan that includes the full CPI-W increase for RAC and funding for both the Cultural Arts Plan and Portable Works collection from the updated general fund forecast. I'm happy that OMF and my office were able to find a solution that accomplishes both our goals, and I ask for your support. And now I turn it over to Jan.
Yes, absolutely. We have agreed to pull forth this change in the budget that's being submitted because there's extra opportunity that wasn't previously known to us. So the cultural arts plan is something that is so needed in the city. We've been hearing in the community and also within our own organization that that the city does not have clear goals and expectations, and we for its arts investment. So we are actually we want to embark on this cultural arts plan as a very community process, much like the Charter Commission, that we're going in there speaking to the community without a lot of pretense of trying to understand what the community needs in terms of arts and culture and how we're making these investments and what's that leading to. Did you?
Only that this is a great opportunity with a recognition of the additional funds. We feel like we're able to fund not only the cultural arts plan, but ask for an investment in our portable works, what are we calling that program? The Portable Works program, to invest in adding additional art to our collection, as well as including the CPI for RAC.
Yeah, so the other thing that, I'm also cognizant of time, but the Portable Works collection has been being outfunded by Multnomah County for quite a while. The city of Portland has been investing 10 grand since the 80s. And we wanted to use this as an opportunity to tell a story about Portland that has been underrepresented. So, and also bring resources directly to artists who have not been able to tell the story of the city through visual works. So, yeah, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Isn't that what the art tax is supposed to do?
No, the art tax funds primarily art education, K through 5 art education, and it also funds general operating support grants for organizations. In addition, there's a 5% portion of the net revenues that goes directly to program type grants and funding access to arts for 6 through 12.
And isn't RAC in the process of actually doing a retooling of how artists get money from RAC, which will be different than how they've gotten money from it in the past?
It's a reallocation of general operating supports dollars with a focus on equity. So because the lion's share of those general operating support dollars have been going to our 5 big arts institutions, it hasn't left many resources for emerging and culturally specific organizations. So it's not really changing the way people access, but more the way we allocate dollars. And they can get more funding if they reach equity goals.
So again, isn't that the change that just happened with RAC? Is that a change that's just about to be implemented with RAC, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's last year, but it,
Yes, this change will be implemented in the next fiscal year. And so, but that's separate from the cultural arts plan and the special appropriation money that goes to Portable Works. And then there's also the Percent for Art program that is also a funding mechanism for RAC that funds per project and per bureau. Mostly, I guess it's been a mix, but it's been permanent works. And so you'll see the physical statues and the stuff that's out there. And we're talking specifically about portable works that can be put into City Hall, Portland Building, and other opportunities where community can interact with the artwork.
So to be clear, this 4.34 million ongoing that's in your write-up, does that include the CAL or not?
The amount that is included in the budget currently includes the full CAL allocation. If I understand it correctly, what you're referring to is that you're requesting funding for this new initiative that originally you had you had reallocated resources internally within your base allocation, and now seeing the updated forecast, you're coming forward and saying, well, you prefer to request new resources for that program.
That's correct. Yep, it's
So if we could-
$200,000 for the cultural arts plan, which will also be fundraising for, and so there's numerous community partners, municipalities that are also interested in investing in this plan. We think the total cost of the plan will be $400,000 with all the community outreach that we'd like to do. And so we have some verbal agreements from some organizations and from some municipalities who are interested once we get buy-in from City Council.
So I know that there's recently been some reorganization, as Commissioner Hardesty alluded to, and then the results of the audit and the work that's been done since then. It would be really helpful to me if we could have an outline for what does RAC use their 4.34 that they currently get,
Sure.
and why the resources for these two requests can't be found within the existing budget.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you.
Happy to.
Great.
All right. See you tomorrow morning.
What?
I'll see you tomorrow morning, 9:30.
Yep, good. Thanks, everybody.